This meeting is cablecast live on Charter Communications Cable TV Channel 8 and is being recorded to be replayed the following Monday and Friday at 1 p.m. on Charter Channel 71 and Comcast Channel 25. Meetings can also be viewed from the city's website, www.cityofcapitola.org. Our technician tonight is Victor Herman. As a reminder, please turn off your cell phones during the meeting, and please sign your name at the sheet at the podium when you come up if you wish. We would appreciate it. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Welch?
Here.
Commissioner Graves?
Here.
Commissioner Smith?
Here.
Commissioner Ruth?
Here.
And Chairperson Ortiz?
Here. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda tonight?
No, Madam Chair.
Commissioners, anything? No? Public comments. Tonight, the first thing on the agenda tonight are public comments, and those first commissioner comments. Excuse me, I always do that. Commissioner comments?
I have none.
No. All right. Comments from those here tonight. These are comments that are on matters that are not on tonight's agenda. So if anybody has come to speak on something that's not on the agenda tonight, now's the time to get up. Everybody's here for the two items. Okay.
Madam Chair, I hate to do this because I forgot, but I do have one comment that I almost missed. This Saturday evening at 7:30, Jeffrey Dunn will be doing a presentation on the life and contributions of Harry Hooper to the city of Capitola. It's free. There will be a small reception at the Capitola Museum directly following that, and everyone is invited to come out and hear about this great member of Capitola's history.
That'd be a fun thing to do on Saturday night.
Yeah.
Staff comments?
No comments, Madam Chair.
Okay. Great. Then approval of the minutes of the October 2nd meeting. Any additions or corrections? If not, a motion.
I move to approve.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
2 abstentions. Commissioner Graves and Commissioner Ruth abstained. We have nothing on our consent calendar tonight. Highly unusual, but absolutely nothing on the consent calendar. We'll move right to public hearings. First public hearing, we have 2 whoppers tonight, so that'll take up some time. The first public hearing is for 203 Central Avenue. It's a design permit, a variance for a rear yard setback and parking, conditional use permit, and a coastal development permit for a second-story addition to an historic resource located in the single-family residential zoning district. Staff report, please.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. The current application is for a design permit, conditional use permit, variance, and coastal development permit for the home at 203 Central Avenue. The applicant is proposing to add a second story to a historic home in the R1 zoning district. The applicant is requesting a variance for setbacks and parking. This application was reviewed previously by the Planning Commission on September 4th and was continued to this evening. This is the existing home at 203 Central Avenue. Historic architect Leslie Dill completed a historic review of the home and made findings that the home is significant at the local level and would also be a contributor to a potential historic district in Depot Hill. The only outstanding design issue not in compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards is the proposed metal roof. The applicant will present examples of the metal roof requests this evening. The applicant submitted 2 sets of elevations, one with a standing seam metal roof and one labeled asphalt shingle roof. This evening, the Planning Commission should clarify in their motion which of the roofing materials will be allowed. During the September 4th meeting, the Planning Commission discussed concerns with the massing of the addition relative to the historic home and the adjacent properties. The applicant submitted a model and a streetscape to address the Planning Commission's concerns. As seen in this slide, a new modern stair element on the south side of the home will lead to the new addition. The addition will be finished with horizontal wood siding, wood-clad windows, and flatboard trim, providing compatible finishes to the historic home. Also, the applicant submitted an updated materials board for the Planning Commission to review, and I think you've all seen that. It was passed around. Also of note, the applicant updated the elevation to show the change in size of the existing window in the gable end. The original submittal proposed a larger window. As seen in this slide and the model, the new addition is set back beyond the midpoint of the existing roof to maintain the mass and scale of the original home as perceived from the street. The existing home is 40 feet long. The new addition will be located 23 feet back from the front facade. This is the south side elevation. The French balcony is within the second-story addition. Also, the modern stair element is visible from this perspective. This is the north elevation. The new addition complies with the increased side yard setback requirement of 4 feet on the second story. The stepping of the addition creates more differentiation between the old and the new. The new window in the addition will be opaque in an effort to maintain privacy between the new addition and the adjacent home. This slide shows the rear elevation. The second-story addition is flush with the first story, located 3 feet 9 inches from the property line. To assist in the evaluation of the two requested variances, I'll go over characteristics of the lot. The lot at 203 Central is 25 feet wide by 50 feet deep. There's a 10-foot wide section of right-of-way between the street and the property line that may be utilized for a driveway approach, driveway, and landscaping within a minor revocable encroachment permit. In the R1 zone, this area may not be counted towards the parking requirement. The rear wall of the home is located 3 feet 9 inches from the rear property line within the required 10-foot rear yard setback. The applicant is requiring a variance for the proposed second-story addition to also be built flush with the first story, just 3 feet 9 inches from the rear property line. And just to clarify, there is a roof overhang also of 1 foot in the proposed drawings. The applicant is also requesting a variance to the required on-site parking. Any addition greater than 10% of the existing floor area requires the on-site parking to be in compliance. The proposed addition is greater than 10% and therefore 2 parking spaces are required. Here is a closer look at the site. The side wall of the home is located 8 feet from the side property line and does not comply with the required 9-foot width. The depth of the driveway is 25 feet with an additional 10 feet located in the right-of-way. Although the right-of-way area can be utilized for parking, the 10-foot right-of-way cannot be counted towards the on-site parking calculation. The applicant does not have any parking on site that complies with the code. The applicant is requesting a variance for the 2 required on-site parking spaces. In reviewing the variance, the Planning Commission must make a finding of special circumstances applicable to the subject property and that granting a variance permit would not constitute a grant of special privileges inconsistent with the limitations of other properties in the vicinity. Staff made findings in support of the variance for the parking in the rear yard setback due to the special circumstances of the location of the historic home on the site. Following the September 4th Planning Commission, staff requested that the applicant work with an arborist to create a plan to protect the giant sequoia at 201 Central Avenue during construction of the new driveway. Within Chapter 12 of our code for trees, there is a provision to protect trees during construction. So the tree has roots that go onto the property of 203 Central. The applicant did not submit details of how the tree would be protected during construction. Within condition of approval number 23, the applicant is required to work with a qualified arborist to determine the most effective construction method for the new driveway that will protect the health and longevity of the giant sequoia redwood. The condition also requires that the arborist be on site to monitor demolition of the existing brick surface and installation of the new driveway. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission review the request for the variances and consider approving the project application, including the requirement for shingles to be installed on the roof. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for staff? None? Okay, this is a public hearing. I'll open the public hearing if the applicant or their representative would like to come up and speak.
Good evening again. I'm Richard Amy, representing the owners, and one of the owners is here tonight. I agree with staff's report. There was a letter we received just recently from the neighbor to the north, and I'm going to initially respond to that. We can't put gutters on the old historic, they're called bells, the type of eaves that are on the back. But the applicant has agreed that we can put gutters on the upper room area as long as we do it on both sides so it matches. And that will certainly reduce by about 80% the water that comes down and drips off to that side. In addition, the gravel we'll look at to make sure that there's not an erosion problem. Second thing is I just wanted to show you how I developed the streetscape that's in your packet. I took photos.
Does he have a mic? Do we have a mic for him?
Sorry. I'll come back here. I took photos of all of the buildings, did an underlay, and then a hand sketch of every building as it appears from the center of the street. Then below that in your packet, you will see photographs I took of the model as though I was standing in the center of the street and illustrating what I had claimed earlier, that I'm going to, if I may, come up.
Grab them all.
That if you look at the model from a streetscape, as I said, you can't really see the second floor from directly in front of the building. Yes, you'll see it at the side, left and right. And the reason that's important to me, and I know some of the people in the audience have looked at the model.
Yeah, you can take it if you think
Okay.
there are other people who want to
If
see it.
anybody wants to look at it, they can. That's the reason for the variance to the rear yard setback. If we met the code requirement, this and did an addition on the building, it would walk towards the front another like 8 feet. And I don't think it would look good. That's the only way I can say that. So with the concurrence of the historian, we did a lot of changes that you heard about the last time. I think I will conclude my presentation and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Questions for the representative? Not yet. The only question I have is, if you can't put a gutter all the way to the front with the bell eaves, can you do it on the first floor just in back of those?
No, what it would be, it wouldn't be on the first floor at all.
Couldn't be on the first
It
floor.
would only be on this second floor, which now you have a roof that has like a 12-foot area that's draining to the right. This would make it so it's only 3 feet that's draining to the property line.
Mhm.
The gutter on the new addition, both left and right, would have gutters
So
and
it will,
downspouts.
it will reduce current runoff.
Significantly.
Okay, thank you.
The owner is here too.
Okay, does the owner wish to get up and speak as well?
Good evening. Doug Satsker, the owner of 203. Let's see, I have another presentation. It's the easiest way for me to tell you about it, and we can talk through it. We had several arborists come. We had 3 of them actually look at the tree. Every one of them confirmed that it's a giant sequoia. I have some information about that. And some stuff about the roofing. I did not get the roofing samples from the supplier that I'm working with. So they're on their way. I've been working with them for about 6 weeks and nothing's here yet. So I have information from them in this presentation. You can go on, Katie. This is the report from the arborist. Katie, if you don't have it, I will send it to you. I thought it had been sent to you, so I will get that to you. If you go to the next slide, there are the highlights of what the arborist had said about the tree. She's concerned about the stability of the tree if we do these things. She's concerned about the continued use of the driveway access we have if we allow it to grow at a natural rate. She said that its lifetime, the roots on our property have been trimmed, and cut, so that has allowed our driveway to be maintained to the level that it is now. We're seeing a lot of raising of our brick and driveway because of the roots searching for surface waters, and so that's going to continue. If we hadn't had the roots, I'm assuming they were trimmed back, and you look at the crown or the crest of the root ball at the bottom of the tree, we would have probably between 20 and 30 inches more loss to our property and to the area that we can park. So you can, if there's anything else you want to read on there. She is concerned about the opportunities of us to try to build around. There's a thing on there, I think it's close to the bottom, about building structures for us to try to tie a concrete driveway into the base or to the ground so that it would be heavier and it wouldn't be able to be pushed out. But these trees get very large. It will eventually just push it out. You can go on. Just so you know that these are the biggest trees and the biggest living thing on Earth. Average size is 164 to 279 feet tall and 20 to 26 feet in diameter. Go to the next slide. This is from her report as well. These are her pictures and information. She's just pointing out the shape of the condition of the tree. Go to the next. And she's calling it a salt burn from the west side or the south side of the tree. The next. The driveway as it is now, and it's actually starting to raise the street. And if you look at the second hump, the one in the middle of the image, my car drags on the way into the driveway on that now. And yeah, we can pull the bricks and we can try to excavate, but we're worried about this being a continuation of a problem. The next slide. The root crown as it is on his property, without it being the crown from the base of the tree to his house is about 36 inches. On this face, it's about almost 30 inches. And so I just took an average of that, and that's where I assumed the 20 to 30 inches, if it was allowed to grow naturally. Go to the next slide. Right now, from Ike's house, it's 48 inches away from his house. It's already starting to push his deck in because of how the tree's growing. If this is left to grow naturally, something is going to have to change either on our property or theirs. And if you see at the bottom, I stated that if that hadn't been trimmed, we would lose, a good portion of our driveway as well. Go to the next one. This is a picture of our house compared to the size of the tree that it gets, just for the fun of it. The next one, the metal roof. So, go ahead. So, metal roofs, from my perspective, are very attractive. They are energy efficient. They are a lot longer life. They are economical in the long term. They are much better environmentally. We can get them, as you can see in these images. The one on the bottom left has a very small, almost a corrugated shape to it, and it's very tight. We can get it in a whole array of colors. We see a lot of houses going up in the area with the metal roof. The massing part of it, every person I've talked to is sort of surprised about it. I'm sure that if I put a shake roof and I want to put solar panels on the roof, the city probably wouldn't have a problem with that. And that's a big, ugly massing of an applied technology that people do to help us with our environment, correct? This has 3 times the life of a shingle. If you go on, there's a whole bunch of specs in here that we can look at. I presented these last time. This here is some of the things that, that's from the supplier that I've been looking at. And again, we can read through them all, but it talks about the solar reflectance, the heating and cooling bills saved by it, and then the lifetime of the product is a lot better. You can go on. We're looking at a small spacing from 12 to 14 and a half, 12 to 16 inches on a regular standing seam. It has to be an aluminum roof because it's so close to the ocean. We're looking at these different styles. There's 3 different styles here. So there's the typical standing seam that you saw in the picture that was in the upper right. This is a corrugated, but it's more on a large and small spacing, the upper right-hand picture there. And the bottom one is a typical corrugated roof. So all these options. This is the color palette for the company that we're working with right now. Because it's aluminum, it's going to have a surface finish on it. And that surface finish we can get in a lot of different colors. Our particular expectation on the house is to keep it in a gray tone or a natural tone. Go on, Katie. This is it's something else I did today for us to try to understand in parallel to Richard's model. This is a picture from Google Earth where we just applied a three-dimensional model that we did in the computer directly to the same height in the image that we had from Google Earth. You can go on. This is it, just one of the pictures that we have of the property. These were done fairly quickly, and they were all based on a three-dimensional model we did off of Richard's drawings, and then we put them into the same perspective as the house. And you can go to the next one. And that's, you can see that the massing with the glass, if the glass if we'd gotten transparency in the back sheet of glass, you wouldn't see the white through there. But this helps us understand a little bit better than the model. My concerns about the tree are we're going to lose our parking space. We're not going to have off-street. Concerns that neighbors might have is that we're now parking our 1 or 2 cars or guest cars on the street and only the street. The house on the right side and the house on the left side have absolutely no parking. They're both line to line built out, and hopefully we can move forward on this project and work with the city on getting us there instead of doing what you need now and then eventually just building over the driveway like everybody else is doing. The other concern about it is the roots already are causing a big trip hazard. We've had people fall. My wife has been, she'd broken her foot here in Capitola, compound fracture with her wheelchair, crutches and things. It's very difficult. The bricks are a part of it, but the continuous raising of the bricks, and even if we have slabs, they'll start raising. And over time, it's only going to get worse. We'll work to try to figure out how to make it a better situation for our home, but it's again, we're going to have to go to extensive, extra lengths and costs to try to get the driveway to stay in position based on this tree. It should never have been planted in the position it's in. So we're concerned about it from a number of things. With the tree, we've talked to Ike. We've sent him a review or a record of the discussion we've had. We've applied for the city to try to see if we could get some help. We've told Ike we would take the tree down and that we would put a new tree in place of it that's more appropriate for the size of the lot in the neighborhood. And I'm sure there's people here that are going to talk about if that's a possibility or, the fact that we're wanting to take a tree down. But we are trying to find a solution for us to make the project move forward, make it work for us and the property on the left.
I have a question, if you don't mind. Did you talk to your arborist at all about shaving the roots again? I don't know how...
It's in the report. She talks about it. She's worried about the health of the tree over time. She's worried about us building the structures over and also shaving the roots. She's worried about the structure of the tree and the health of the tree. She said it's in moderately good health at this time.
Right. What did she say about shaving the roots?
If you bring up
The reason I'm asking is that, we have a homeowner next to you who's of advanced age.
Yes.
And, during his lifetime, it would be nice if we could do the least, and it would cost you the least in the long run,
Yep.
Really basically do almost nothing to the driveway right now, shave the roots, and see if we can get a few more years. And then when Ike passes, it won't be that much of a hardship to...
Whatever happens to that property, the tree's going to have to come down eventually. And so it's something we're going to have to consider. I'm not sure if I have this in here. Can you go to the next slide?
Yes,
up?
it's right there.
Is it?
Severely destabilized if the roots will cut at the edge of the driveway.
That's about cutting the roots. She does have a part in there about shaving them as well. And this is just my pulling some highlights out. But it's in there. If you go
Okay.
up to
I'm
the...
sorry we didn't get that report,
Yeah.
but I would like
I'll
to
send it,
see what,
I can send
you know,
it to Katie right now,
that's a
actually.
possibility, I think, for right now, and do the least possible to mitigate your parking problem and the
Yeah.
trip hazard, and not distress an older person who's, you know, you know how.
Yeah, he's
distressed
very
he is.
upset about it. Yeah. It wasn't a very
Any other
good
questions for the
conversation.
applicant?
Yeah, I'm just curious, actually, to what you're requesting from us, because I don't see that we have the authority to instruct you or allow you to take down a tree that's not on your property.
Right.
It
It's
seems to be-
highlighting to me, it was to make sure that you're aware of our concerns and challenges, and the hope that there isn't any further discussion about the driveway. If we allow this to move forward, that driveway is going to have to either be built in a way that it can continuously change, because the tree is going to be moving it, or that we try to get rid of the tree, and we have a plan for that. So that just, I wanted to make sure that you knew that we're really concerned about the driveway, and it's likely within the next 5 years or so that we will not be able to even park a car in our driveway. And that's a big concern, right? Because we talked for 20 minutes last time, 2 months ago, about our problem with parking, and until somebody said, well, it's an existing problem, we're not changing the existing situation that we have a parking problem. But if we allow the tree to continue to grow naturally, we won't be able to park on the lot.
But I don't think that's a problem we can resolve here. That's,
No, I
I
mean, that's
I think
it's
it's
a really
problem that
important
you
part
have
of it.
You have to resolve that between you and your neighbor. We can grant
Right.
you permission, but then the problem is between you and your neighbor to
Yeah.
resolve how you're going to solve that.
Right.
And what about the root trimming? You know, I think it's worth pursuing.
Right.
So in this report, it does state that that the tree is so close to the driveway that it would be severely destabilized if the roots were cut at the edge of the driveway. The tree would be very vulnerable to strong winds off the ocean. A phased root removal would not be as destructive to the health of the tree as a sudden removal, but it would still damage the tree's structural support. So,
Well, we had one of those in our neighborhood, a pine tree that was right on the property line like that, and it took the court to resolve it and get it removed. I think that's what we're looking at here.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the awareness of it. And I wanted to make sure that, because it's been brought up, that it's important that we protect this tree. And we're making sure that we're taking every step to keep everybody informed. And if parking is a concern, it's going to continue to get worse with this specific property.
Right?
Any other
Chair, I
questions?
don't know if this is the appropriate time for me to ask,
I know, I'm trying to get...
but I'm going to just kind of ask it anyway. If the parking requirement were waived,
Mhm.
would you be willing to look at a phased removal of the roots so that we get a couple more years out of having that tree safely standing where it is?
I would, yes. And I just need to take that home to the boss and make sure that she's okay with that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you. Just stand by, all right? Oh, let's see.
No, I'm here.
Let me just ask a question. What do the pavers look like that you are proposing for the driveway? We never got a picture of them.
Do you, in Richard's packet, do you have the landscape drawing?
I do.
I have another one if you...
That's the other house.
Wait a minute. Where am I?
It is
it's
there.
the last,
It's just-
the last page to the packet.
Yeah, they don't, it doesn't really...
not-
They're large concrete
How
slabs.
big are they? How big are they?
They vary depending on where they are. The driveway are slabs, so that we talked about the drainage that we want to put into it, so that it's not, we want big surfaces, but we also want to retain the water from the property. And so there's a 6-inch separation between the slabs. So the driveway is the 9 feet wide by approximately probably 9 feet, and then a 6-inch gap. And then as it walks around the stairway tower, it's smaller with the same rock gap. And then in the front yard, there's an arrangement of slabs that are poured around a planting area. So I have a big drawing of it if you need it.
Okay.
The
Okay, thanks.
So just to clarify, if you don't do anything with those roots, can you put in that what's proposed in the drawings?
If we don't do anything with the roots,
okay.
no, we would have to, we'd come up with a solution that's flexible with the roots. We'd have to do something, maybe it's just gravel, or something like you did in the parking lot right here, where you have baskets of gravel, or you have controlled gravel that would allow that to change. So we'd have to do something like that. It's not going to be my son's favorite thing because of a skateboard, but
If I can try to answer, the existing site has no pervious surface at all. All of those bricks are grouted in. And what we designed is something that is pieces of concrete with a 6-inch strip that is gravel that allows the water to percolate down. So we've increased the pervious area so that it can go down, and also created something that's somewhat stable to walk on. So it isn't pavers as you see traditionally of little tiny stones.
And
That's
how-
not what
Yeah. They're fairly large. I mean, they look like they're as wide as the driveway, right?
Yes.
So they're poured in place.
They're
They've
poured in
got
place.
There's a foundation.
And, and typically you dowel between the two to walk them, but it's gravel to the ground between it.
Yeah. So this is a public hearing. I'm sure there's people here to talk about this issue. Please step forward. And if you would give your name and write your name if you would, thank you.
Okay, good evening, commissioners, staff. My name is Lon Price. Should I? Oh, this one's on. Okay, great. And well, I'll write my name at the end. I'm a member of the family that owns 205 Central. We're just down the hill from the house. And I'd like to speak on 3 topics tonight. The first is a commendation to the staff. The second will be specific requests for conditions on the project approval. And the third will be my kind of assessment of the project. In the beginning, one of the variances being considered for the project involves parking. And one component of the original proposal was to utilize an encroachment permit and allowing the portion of the 10-foot driveway to be used to contribute towards one of the parking spaces. And I questioned how a revocable permit for a use of public land could be used to satisfy the requirements for a permanent structural change, and I wanted to thank the staff for addressing and clarifying that issue. So, thank you. The next topic is, well, my primary concern with the project remains the loss of light to my south-facing windows, and for that reason, I prefer not to see it built. In the event that the project should be approved, however, there are 2 specific concerns that come up for me. The applicant is requesting a variance to the rear setback, which would allow the new 2nd-story rear wall to be in line with the original 1st-story rear wall. And this reasonable request would help to integrate the new with the old. It seems perfectly wonderful. The drawings submitted to the commission show a rear roof overhang at the edge of the proposed 2nd story. And I feel that extending the roof beyond the wall would further block the view of my remaining sliver of sky, which I can kind of get that way over the house to the other side. And I believe that to allow to extend the roof beyond the already non-conforming rear wall would be unreasonable. And the second item there is, if this were new construction, the current building code would require that all the rainwater runoff from the roof be contained within the property that the structure is located on. Currently, there's no gutters on the eaves of 203 Central, and during a heavy rainfall, the runoff from that 1212 roof actually strikes the wall of our house. It doesn't even hit the ground. So as I see it, given the close proximity of the 2 houses, the only way to mitigate this would be with the installation of gutters. Now, I wrote this before I came tonight and listened to them saying, yes, we'd be willing to put gutters up. I do question what the difficulty of putting a gutter on the bell curve was. I don't quite see how it's an edge, and I don't quite understand what the difficulty is, but possibly we can talk about that later. So, in conclusion to that, I respectfully request that as conditions for granting the permit, that the commission would require gutters along the eave adjoining 205, and that they not allow any roof overhang at the rear beyond the variance requested for the rear wall. Now, finally, my third topic, Depot Hill is a small neighborhood that's been desirable for over 100 years. The combined pressures of population and wealth are molding the neighborhood. I've seen many changes in the 50 years that I've been coming here, and the pressure will likely increase. As a community, we can hope to manage this change and guide development towards designs that respect and honor the past while tastefully providing the futures that today's humans desire. As I see it, the project before us is exceptionally well designed. I find the setback of the second story, the relative massing to the new and the old, quite pleasing. I think the glass enclosed stairway creates a great transition between the contemporary and the historic. I can imagine how the addition will make the house much more functional. I think the front window and the gable end should remain as originally proposed. It balances better with the new elements. The vaunted cottage character of the original structure, which had no window in the gable end at all, was significantly altered with the earlier change in roof pitch. And though I hesitated to weigh in on the metal roof, here are my thoughts. Thomas Jefferson put a standing seam steel roof on Monticello around 1800. A metal roof is more environmentally sustainable and lasts longer than asphalt shingles. And no, I didn't talk to these guys since the last meeting. And a metal roof, particularly a standing seam type of the upper left of his diagram, would more appropriately showcase the new structure. In the late 19th century, metal roofing, when they developed, flat sheet, was one of the most common roofing methods in the United States. So, in summary, if change must come, I would lament the loss of the sky view out my window. But I believe this project exemplifies the type of sensitive development that I would wish for Depot Hill. Thank you.
Thank you, Lon.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Adam Samuels. I live on Depot Hill. I'll be short. I got a call from Ike today. I think many of us has been speaking to Ike, and I think the clearest message I can send to you from him is don't cut down his tree. I have only been in Depot Hill for about 8 years, and those trees were one of the first things I noticed when I came up. He's told me often about when he first planted them in 1968. I think they're hard to miss if you first come and visit. I think they were hard to miss for the applicants when they made the choice to buy their home. I think they probably realized they would something that would be part of their neighborhood and their immediate neighbors. So anything we can do to take care of that would be awesome. Thank you.
Who else is here tonight to talk about this? Steph? You need to go up to the mic, ma'am. I'm sorry. There's folks at home that'd like to hear you.
Oh, dear. Okay.
Or not hear you.
I just wanted to say that I thoroughly agree with the gentleman that just spoke. Ike is a treasure, as are his trees, not just to the neighborhood, but to him as well. So I don't know what else to say other than if we can retain them, at least until, bless his heart, That's it. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
I'm a bit emotional over this.
Thank you. What is your name?
Oh, Anne Ryan Atkinson.
Oh, thank you, Anne.
I lived at 211 for many years, and then I was on Fanmar Way too, also for many years. So I love the Depot Hill area. It's very special to everyone.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Who else tonight? Step forward. We don't keep it moving here.
I'm sorry, I have such a long name.
Hi, I'm Kathy Barnes. I'm the property owner across the street at 208 Central Avenue. I guess I'm here tonight, and I wrote a letter for the last public hearing, but I'm I'm here. So one of the things I'd like to comment about is basically what I consider the elephant in the room, which is that the proposed addition is way too much building for the size of the property. This second-story addition will tower over everything around it. It will reduce privacy for the neighbors and further contribute to the parking problems experienced by the residents who live on Central Avenue, as well as the residents who overlook Monterey Avenue that have to park on Central Avenue in that neighborhood. And it's just kind of over the top. Another thing that one of the curious things that has happened with this request is the manipulation of the floor area ratio. The calculating of the square footage ratio has been a moving target. The original square footage of the existing property as advertised when it was sold in 2013 was 763 square feet. Then it was reduced to 471 square feet with the initial submission of the permit request. Then it further manipulated to it occurred when it was pointed out that all living space was not calculated in the request, namely the lofts. So further manipulation took place with the lofts, and now we currently have the addition at, well, the existing house at 573 square feet with an addition of 203 square feet as a second story, which brings it to 775 square feet, which when I add it up, it adds up to be 50 square feet over the maximum, but you see where I am. It is a moving target, and to me it's disingenuous from the property owner's point of view there that they continue to manipulate so they can get the maximum square footage out of their addition. Anyway, I guess it begs the question is why did the applicants buy this property in the first place? If it's not what they wanted, the tree was there, the roots were there, it is what it is. Anyway, I urge your commission to disapprove the two variances requested for the rear yard setback and the off-street parking. Zoning is in place to ensure that future development is consistent with how we would like our neighborhoods to be. The granting of these variances undermines the work that has been done to realize our future vision. And I didn't get to see the streetscape. That wasn't included on the, that popped up here, I guess.
We can have the staff member show you.
Streetscape, from my point of view, the street moves up on the opposite side of the street, so it's going to block my view of the sky also from 208.
And maybe Kathy, if you could take a look at that on your own. We'll continue with the dialogue, and then you can always come back if you have comments about that.
Good evening. My name is Rex Walker. This is my sister. I pretty much agree with what she has said. I am also a little concerned about why, certain things are not in the packet for the public that, are being presented tonight. This is supposed to be a public hearing, and we're supposed to have all that information. There doesn't seem to be a landscape plan that is going to be used, the streetscape plan.
Those are generally in the plans that are available up at City Hall. Those are...
Well, they were not available in the packet that was that you could download off the internet.
There should be visuals of all the...
Madam Chair, this was a continued item, and I think a lot of those materials were in the original staff report. We often don't recirculate those on continued matters.
Although the streetscape wasn't.
The streetscape wasn't, but the landscape plans were.
But so originally, when an application comes forward, those things are in the original, they're online in the original packet, correct?
Yes, in this circumstance, the landscape architect was not able to provide a digital copy, so.
So that's what
That
I'm
was an
complaining
issue.
about.
Yeah.
There is
Thank you.
no, as far as I'm concerned, I have not seen a streetscape or a landscape plan. And the last landscape plan that I saw for this project was concrete. It was not landscaping. It was a driveway in concrete squares.
You're welcome to take a look at the plan that I brought to your sister.
Well, is there a landscape plan that I could see?
Yes, there is. Who has my plans?
I've got them here. What, you know what page?
The landscape. They're
The
set, they're the
landscape.
last page, I believe. And you can take a look at that, and if you'd like to come back up. Have you got anything further to?
Let's see. I too am concerned about the massing that overwhelms this little simple historic cottage. That's the charm of this this house, is its size and its scale to the rest of the neighborhood. By adding a second story, you've taken away that scale of the charm that it had before.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else here tonight to speak?
Well, yeah, it appears that these are just
So
concrete blocks
could you on that side, on the driveway side,
on the landscape side.
and some landscaping as well?
Well, is that appropriate for our? I mean, this is supposed to be a public right-of-way. It's the encroachment permit. I don't think is supposed to be for cement. It's supposed to be for landscaping.
We'll take that into consideration. Thank you.
And I really don't think it's fair to exempt them from having any on-site parking. It's not fair for the rest of the neighborhood.
Thank you. So I'm not seeing anyone else who's...
I just wanted to come back as I was reading from my prepared script, but I wanted to mention about the tree as well. I personally feel like your advice is the best if they can kind of wait it out. Ike is a wonderful gentleman. He is elderly. I was around when he planted the trees.
What were you, 2 or something?
No, 1964. That's you know, that's what he said. Anyway, point is, I think that if they didn't spend the money and the energy to put in the cast-in-place pads, which would require root pruning and stuff, and went with maybe a fill and a small pavers that would be flexible, and just sort of manipulated those for the next however many years, that eventually things would change. They could probably remove the tree, then they could finish out the rest of the landscape. That would be my advice, is to just try and wait it out until the situation changes.
Yeah.
That's all.
Thank you. Anyone else tonight? Okay. Then we'll close the public hearing, and I'll ask for commissioner comments. I'd like to make the first comment. Don't all jump up at
Everybody's
the same
on there.
time.
Okay, I'll jump in.
All right.
So first, I have a question for staff. I think in the last time we heard this, we talked a lot about the square footage and the issues, and my recollection is that we are comfortable that we're looking at accurate square footage and the calculations in the report are accurate.
That's correct.
As most of everybody in the community knows, I'm the president of the Board of Trustees for the Capitola Museum, and am really concerned about historic preservation in Capitola because that's what the community has said that they want. Depot Hill is in many, many ways the same as it was many, many, many years ago. And the community has said that they want to keep it that way. It makes Capitola a lot of what it is. And I went back and looked at the ordinance that was passed in 1982 that had to do with historic preservation, and the Planning Commission has some duties to the City Council when it comes to looking at conditional use changes to historic features. And those include weighing the benefits of the proposed change against the detriments. And in reviewing these, we have to come up with either there's not a significant detriment or that denial would create a significant hardship. And it's our job to preserve and enhance through recommendations to council and through our rulings on different projects, the historic resources that we have in the community. This property is one of those resources. And because of that, when I look at it, I look at the other homes in the area that have been remodeled, have been hyphenated, have been brought up to some modern standards and sized so that families can, in fact, live here and enjoy these tiny little cottages that we want so much to preserve. And there are a couple of really good examples along Central Avenue where second-story additions have been added to teeny-weeny little cottages and have not negatively impacted the visual streetscape, historic feeling and character of the neighborhood. I think the design that we have before us on this house follows with those other elements on Central Avenue. There is a house right down the street on the same side of the street, and I apologize for not having the number of that house off the tip of my tongue, but it's very similar. And Carolyn Swift, who is our historian, was originally concerned about the massing, and we walked the neighborhood and we looked at some of those other houses, and the model kind of helps and kind of not, but the streetscape that you included in the packet where you've really looked at it from the street does, in my opinion, appropriately reflect what we're going to see when that second story is built. And I don't believe the character or the feeling of the area will be detrimentally impacted by the addition of the second story. The design itself, I think, is done very well with the glass and the modernization of the stairwell element to even minimize the massing more. I went over there today, though, and I looked at the driveway area and the roots of the tree, and I've been on record before that I think giant sequoias getting planted in town is a real mistake. Understanding the benefits of finding a way to get a few more years out of before we have to do something with that tree, I think is a benefit to the community. And Depot Hill is losing a lot of its really beautiful trees right now. And so if we could extend that out by coming up with some creative ways, I think that that would be a good thing for us to do. And it would be more benefit to the community than it would be detriment to issue a variance in that case. So I'd like to see us come up with a way to do that. And if even temporarily, if we can do a temporary variance on the parking requirement and not require parking. The applicant, the owners of the house, have to get really creative because having broken my foot and wound up in a wheelchair for 12 weeks, I was looking at it from that kind of access, and the roots are so wavy that I don't know how you'd get a wheelchair down that area and into the house. So there are still some issues, I think, that need to be worked in that regard. But I would be willing to waive the parking requirement.
Yeah, I would concur with most of what you've said. It's a unique size lot. I think it's a unique house up there. But I believe the property owner, in this case the applicant, has the same rights to enjoy his property as everybody else on Depot Hill does. And I think in most cases that involves using that public right-of-way for parking or your driveway. It's something almost everybody enjoys up there. I personally don't have a problem with the metal roof. I may be a minority of one up here on that, but that doesn't seem to bother me. I would not set aside the parking requirement. I would be inclined to still impose the parking requirement and let the tree issue be resolved between the two property owners.
Well, I would concur with most of what my fellow commissioners here have said. I took a real close look at the tree, and unfortunately, I think it's going to be more of a detriment to Ike's place than your driveway over a short period of time. But having said that, I agree that I think it's just a timing issue, and I for one would be willing to give up the parking requirement to allow that tree to stay there and try to figure out some way to just use that as a temporary parking in the meantime. The massing, I was surprised. I actually went and stood at 208, and I think I was surprised by how little I think it's really going to add as far as looking at as a massing in the area. So I think it's, to me, I could live with it. I don't have a real issue with the metal roofing. I kind of have an issue with where we stand with this whole potential to have a historic district in Depot Hill, because we're basing a lot of our judgments on what could be and may be, but don't know if it's ever going to be. And because it currently meets the Secretary of Interior standards minus the roofing, I don't know. The roofing is something that can be replaced. I think also that gutters is something that has potential on a bell curve. I would be more concerned on how you're going to get a straight panel roof on a bell curve roof than how you get the gutters there. Having used to have a sheet metal business and a gutter business, I could definitely get the gutters up there, but I'm not sure how you get that panel of flat metal to lay flat on a bell curve, and I'm sure they'll figure that part out. And what was the, there was one other item I wanted to cover at that. But with that, I think I could move forward with the project as proposed.
Commissioner Graves?
Yeah, I guess I'll be a little different. I like everything everybody said, but I think it was said well tonight. We're trying to build too much on very small lots. And while it's true down the street is, I think it's 119 that you were talking about, it may be close to that. I can remember the argument of how the addition to the rear of that building was going to look into Mr. Redding's backyard and some other people, and there was the complaints with regards to that. At least we don't have that here. My major concern, or my comments, were I wish somebody had designed, it's a great design, don't get me wrong, I wish somebody had designed the outside stairwell to be a circular stairwell inside and preserving what driveway there is, even though it's inadequate at best. But in all honesty tonight, I have been so hard on parking in the village and the city of Capitola in general with regards to variances. I cannot support a variance to the parking. And I do understand that many of the units that face on Monterey Avenue do use Central for parking. I'm well aware of that. John Dixon lived there for years, and others. The young man, and I'm drawing a blank, that just passed away, a friend of ours, Mick Langhoff, there you go, all use some of that frontage on Central Road, Central for parking. I'll make a couple more comments. The driveway as proposed, and I understand what the architect was trying to do and get some groundwater penetration and the rest of it, I think is going to be, the slabs are going to be pushed up the same as paving rocks are going to be pushed up. And I think that the period of time is going to be the same no matter what. I think if I were the homeowner, I'd go with the smaller paving stone because it's easier to move around and reconfigure the parking or the driveway as it is. I think I've made all my comments. I'd like to see the stairwell inside. It could have been a circular inside. I'd like to see us get some parking on site, even if it was one. I could probably approve it, but it's none. I just have to say no to the development. Sorry.
Okay. Madam Chair, can I amend my comments? I didn't make mention of the roof, then it just slipped my mind. I would love to approve a metal roof. I think that functionally they're awesome, but because it violates the Secretary of Interior standards, I can't approve a metal roof. I would be recommending the asphalt shingle.
I live next door to a metal roof, and it's kind of interesting that when it rains, if it ever rains, and it just did a while back, it's not as noisy as people make it out to be, and I don't think any more water runs off the eaves than if it were shingle, asbestos shingle, shake, whatever you want to put on it.
Okay. I don't have a problem with this design. I think that the scale of the design is fine. If you really look at a broader streetscape on Central, this remodel fits into that. And I know it's hard for us to change our neighborhoods. We're all lamenting the change of Capitola, and we on the Planning Commission are always fighting against it and pushing back and trying to figure out ways to keep it, lowering lot coverage, doing whatever we can. But I think this one does a good job. And when you take a 500 square foot home, which probably not very many of us live in, and add 200 square feet to it, you just can't fault somebody for wanting to add 200 square feet to their home. I just don't see how you can do that. And having it be set back as far as it is, I think it's very sensitive and really works. What I'm hearing a lot in this community is that we want to maintain our historic integrity. That's what I hear all the time. Now, when it comes to our own homes, we may not want to do that, but I think overall we want to maintain that historic old-time feel of Capitola. And if we want to do that, then we need to leave that door open for a future possible historic district. We may not be ready for it right now, and we may never be ready for it. But if we make decisions now that close that door forever, then we've missed the opportunity for generations to come. We don't know what they want, and the Planning Commission and the City Council have heretofore kept it up in a way that we can still have a historic district if we want one. Do we really tonight want to make a decision that could undermine that in the future just by a roof? I love metal roofs too. I'd love to have one. I love the way they look. I'm just thinking that it's not worth us possibly losing something that generations to come might want. Our children, our children's children, things might change and people want it. So I would really prefer that we don't close that door for generations to come. As far as the parking and the driveway are concerned, I'd like to be a humanist about this and find a way that we can figure out how to have a temporary solution so that these folks can enjoy parking in Capitola, so that Ike is not totally stressed the last few, whatever he has, days, months, weeks of his life, for what reason, when we can come to a solution. Let's figure out a way that we can get a temporary solution to this driveway, and then when Ike is no longer here, the people who buy Ike's house in the long run are not going to be they're not going to be able to do anything to that house with that tree there either. So I think I'd like to have staff help us figure that out. The other thing about the driveway that we're not bringing up tonight that I have concerns about is the narrowness of the driveway, and the fact that at some point, Ike's not going to worry about it right now, but someday when somebody buys that house, the people who get out of their car in that driveway have to step on somebody else's property. That's going to be a problem in the future, and I want to go on record as saying that is going to be a problem in the future. Somebody may not, you're going to have to resolve that if someone buys that home, because they may not want you stepping on their property in order to get out of your car. I want to go ahead with the gutters on the second floor. I trust that that will be enough and will be a better situation than we have now. I'd like a condition put in about the gutters on the second floor. I'd like a condition put in about netting the tree, whatever happens during construction, and making sure that that netting is permanent. It doesn't come down during construction, and if it does, there are some type of penalties for that, because what I see and have seen since the last 20 years is that a lot of trees seem to die after construction, even though we've tried to take care of them. And I'd like to make sure that we take care of this in whatever way we decide to handle this tree. But I do feel we need to have some netting. let's see, I have a couple of other points. I'm not sure we're ready to make a decision tonight based on this driveway situation. I don't think you're going to be getting started right now in the middle of winter on your construction anyway, and I'd really like to see us really put this to bed for right now and get it handled so that the staff is not dealing with problems. More sad calls from Ike, who's frantic about it. Let's figure out a way to get this tree, even if it in the long run undermines the tree, to get some shaving. It might buy us some time. So I'd really like to see that, and maybe gravel or something else. And I'm sorry about your son's skateboard, but sometimes just for a while we have to do it. And I'm also willing to go without any parking for a while. If we can phase this over a period of time and take a look at it so that they can get a good driveway in the long run on this piece of property that it has a non-conforming tandem use, that's my goal.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
That we approve the variance for parking as it now stands, but then suspend the actual implementation of the parking for at least 1 year, and at the period of that 1 year time, have staff revisit this item and look to see if the parking variance then can be applied to the driveway, and if the tree's still there, give staff the option to extend it for another 6 months, another year.
And what would happen to the construction of the driveway during that period of time?
I think that would be up to the applicant.
Can I clarify one thing? There is not adequate on-site parking, even if we were to install a driveway in the future as proposed.
Right.
It still wouldn't meet the parking requirements. So if you were to grant a variance, it would be...
Yeah, exactly what was shown on the plan.
Right.
Okay.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have a problem with the variance, and maybe we can piggyback tandem that with not using any parking for the next year, and to, so that, or
Yeah, so that's
or
what
a
I'm
new
suggesting, suspend that off-street parking requirement. Grant the variance so it's there, so it doesn't have to come back and be revisited and us taking action for the variance in the future, but suspend the off-street parking requirement until such time as that tree can be removed and the driveway installed properly.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
If you give a variance to the parking as the permit and the request and the staff report is written, what's the inducement to ever do anything with the driveway, because they don't need any off-street parking?
Well, I think, at least in my mind, the requirement still stands.
But
You're just suspending that requirement until such time as the tree is removed.
the staff report, I understand what you're saying. I think I know what you want to do. I think the wrong wording is here. If you give a variance and the variance says they do not have to provide 2 off-street parking spaces, no matter if you put a time frame
But that's not what the variance says. The variance says
the variance, as I saw it on the
inadequate
screen.
parking spaces and that one is allowed in the 10-foot right-of-way.
No, that isn't what it said. It said just the opposite of that. The staff just explained a minute ago, if I heard them correctly, that even if they had a driveway today, it would not meet our parking requirement for 2 off-street parking places. So your kind of friendly amendment to a motion, if it ever gets here, basically just said there's no inducement to do anything with the tree other than there's a year, but doesn't say anything to that. And then they can extend it 6 or 12 months. What you're saying is they can extend indefinitely the need for no on-site parking spaces.
Can I clarify something, though? The variance doesn't say they don't have any parking. It says they have 2 substandard parking spaces,
No.
and one of those is in the
No.
public right-of-way, right?
No.
No, so the variance is stating that they don't need to meet the parking requirement on site.
It doesn't say anything about the
Because they don't,
substandard.
because they don't have the standard size, so they're saying they don't have to meet it regardless.
But we could amend findings that that you are requiring substandard parking on site, including the 8x17 space and 9x18 space. So we
that's
could
what
make
you're
the
trying to
findings
do.
Yeah,
there.
I mean, that makes more sense.
Yeah, and then also just a suggestion for the condition, you could condition it that currently they cannot do any shaving to the roots, and that future either shaving to the roots or installment of a driveway that would impact the roots would require that application for flat work to come back to the Planning Commission.
Which would mean that if we were to approve it, the plans that we have do not have an accurate landscaping plan, because the driveway that's shown in that plan is concrete blocks. And we're saying that they can't install that because it can't be done without impacting the roots.
I think I see the voice of reason walking up.
If I may, I think I'm suggesting you might be able to get there by saying that the concrete pads in the parking as shown cannot be installed until arborists agree on how some sort of paving, some sort of surface can be put in. And I like your suggestion that in the meanwhile you put gravel or something. I think that can happen, and I think it's a crown thing, but you can make that more of a level area. The rest of the landscaping plan, the trees and everything else can still be installed, but you're talking about the first parking space, which is about 20 feet deep, 10 feet wide. That deconstruction, reconstruction of the site is kept to the minimum site disturbance possible. Something to that effect. That's my suggestion.
Thank you. I think that's what we were trying to say.
I'd just like to make one comment. The way I understood the staff, the parking, the properly sized one, the 9 by 18, is across the public right-of-way. It cannot be used to mitigate against the requirement for 2 parking spaces. And staff clearly stated that if you allow the project to go forward, you are saying we are granting a variance that requires no on-site parking. That's what you're saying. That's what staff said. So either you grant them a variance for no on-site parking, or they don't get to do it. And you can require that they have one substandard space on the property as a condition of approval. But there's no way they're ever going to get 2 spaces because one of the spaces is across the public right-of-way. That's it.
Didn't Dee Contreras, when she built her house on Depot Hill, get a variance for the parking, and because the parking extends into the public right-of-way?
Well, my personal belief, Mick, is that there are a lot of driveways that extend into the right-of-way. I think the staff's approach on this is correct under the ordinance, but I think you can make a motion, you guys can make a motion, not me, that will vary the parking requirement. But if you just make a blanket motion that you're agreeing that no variance can be made, then they don't have to ever provide parking. That's the point I was trying to make. And I think you guys want them to get an off-site space, and you want them to use probably part of the right-of-way for parking. The trick is in how you make your motion. And I'm not clairvoyant on how to make it, but I think I know what you want.
I think too, most people's motivation is wanting off-street parking. It's not that they're going to want to park on the street all the time. That's the lesser of the choices for anyone that I know. You would rather have your own dedicated parking spaces, and so I would think that their motivation would be to, as soon as they can, get those parking spaces utilized.
I would just recommend maybe that we just, for me, I could approve the variance for no on-site parking, having the plans recognize that they do show a driveway there, and at some point they're probably going to use that. I agree with Commissioner Graves that while that 10-foot right-of-way is not designated as part of what we would say the ordinance is a parking area, almost everyone in Depot Hill parks in that 10-foot area because our areas are so small to park in, with the exception of maybe my driveway. But so I could move forward with the variances as proposed and keep that as a driveway, and maybe at some point, they could look at how they actually put concrete across there or whatever, but at this point, no improvements done. And also, we have condition number 23 that talks about when they do that, there has to be an arborist to review that and make sure no damage happens to the tree anyway. So maybe I should just make a motion and see if it goes anywhere.
I like that.
All right, well, then I'll make a motion that we approve as outlined by staff with the variances for both the setback and the off-street parking to move this forward.
Can I have a friendly amendment about the netting and the second-story gutters?
Okay, sure, oh yeah.
And roofing material.
Do we need to add that in there? Right.
We'll need to know which type of roofing material.
And what would your motion?
Well, I'd like to see this get through. For me, I think the metal roofing is a temporary thing, especially if they're talking about aluminum with the redwood tree over the top of aluminum roofing. It doesn't seem to last as long as one might think, but I don't know how that really impacts the long-term part of looking at Depot Hill as a historic district, because to me it's something that can be replaced. It's a replaceable item. It's not like this feature of a doorway or something like that that would have to be tore out. But I'll start my recommendation at least for to move this along with the metal roofing and see where it goes.
Is there a second to that?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Welch?
Yes.
Commissioner Graves?
No.
Commissioner Smith?
No.
Commissioner Ruth?
Yes.
Chairperson Ortiz?
No. Motion fails, so here we go again.
I will reiterate the same motion, but with the shingled roof.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Welch?
Yes.
Commissioner Graves?
No.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Commissioner Ruth?
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz, or
Yes.
Chairperson Ortiz?
Yes, motion passes. So now the staff just has to work with the applicant about, what they do with the driveway. It's a temporary driveway, which my guess is that does not mean large foundation concrete slabs. And then as soon as possible, get a driveway in there.
I was wondering if you could address the issue of the rear roof overhang. That never came up in your discussion.
I'm so sorry it did not. And no, I don't believe we can go backwards, but let me say that I meant to bring that up, and I went...
I didn't realize that I could jump up and say anything.
You really can't, actually, but I'm really a nice person. Let me mention to you, let me mention to you that Katie and I went out there today, and we really looked at the back of the property with that in mind. And both of us feel that it just doesn't, for the detriment to that property by not having any west-facing protection, that detriment, the amount that you would get is so little that the benefit to the property owner, I think, is greater.
Okay.
I wouldn't have voted for that, but I meant to bring it up.
It never came up.
Thank you.
So
I meant to
wanted
bring it up.
But we will work with the neighbor to make it as tight as we can.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that sounds
That's
good.
see?
I remembered
That's
one
capital.
comment I missed in my...
Sorry to barge in.
I wish we had more neighbors like this gentleman. He
Yeah.
would be a great neighbor to have.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, everyone who came tonight for that public hearing. We appreciate it, and I think it was a good resolution. So we're going to move on to our next public hearing. Which is item B for 124 Central Avenue. It's a design permit and conditional use permit for an addition to an historic single-family home located, please go outside to talk, guys. Located in the single-family residential district. Staff report, please.
Okay. I have the jump drive for the owner. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Before you this evening is an application. We're still on Central Avenue, just right up the road, diagonal. Yeah, it was easy to do site visits today. The application before you this evening is for a design permit, conditional use permit, and coastal development permit for an addition to a historic home at 124 Central. The applicant is proposing to remove portions of the existing home while preserving the front craftsman-style cottage and introducing a new addition. This is an image of the home as seen from the street. In this image, you can see the porch entry and also the existing garage. This home is very unique in the fact that the original 1905 cottage is in the back of the home, and the front of the home is a 1908 Craftsman addition. So 3 years later, they decided to add on to the home with a Craftsman addition. The Craftsman addition is character defining of the and the original cottage is barely visible from the street. The applicant is proposing to remove the original 1905 cottage and build a rear addition to the 1908 Craftsman-style home. The architectural historian Seth Bernstein that reviewed the project for consistency with
Excuse me, can we just have the young lady shut the door? Thank you.
Yep.
Very hard to hear over all of it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Okay, thanks. So Seth Bernstein, who reviewed the project, supports the methodology of removing the rear cottage because the rear cottage has been modified significantly with only 2 side walls remaining. There's also an addition behind that cottage, so just the 2 side walls are remaining. During the September 24th, 2014 Architecture and Site Review Committee meeting, the city historian Carolyn Swift brought forth additional information regarding Frank Ranier's residency at the property. She also raised questions regarding the property's eligibility at the state and federal level. The DPR has since been updated and reviewed by a third party. The updated historic report includes updated information related to Frank Ranier and also includes that the home would be eligible for listing at the federal level within a future historic district. Also during this meeting, Carolyn Swift asked questions about the removal of the original 1905 cottage as proposed and would it jeopardize the historic integrity of the home. The staff consulted Seth Bernstein of Past Consultants. He confirmed that the removal of the 1905 cottage would not jeopardize the local listing or within a future historic district due to the severe alterations of the original 1905 cottage. Ms. Swift also asked for construction details and engineering on how the original 1905 cottage could be removed without impacting the 1908 Craftsman. The applicant submitted construction details to preserve the home. The plans were completed by a certified engineer. There are several remaining issues that were brought up by the historian Carolyn Swift. She mentioned concern for the changes to the character-defining features of the garage, including the door style, windows, and barge board. The applicant has since modified the plans to maintain the barge board and windows. The design of the garage doors is proposed to be modified. There are no photographs available to identify how old the garage doors are. The hardware on the garage door currently indicated to the architectural historian that the doors were likely not original. Ms. Swift also had concerns with the mass and scale of the addition relative to the historic structure. The applicant will present a model this evening to help articulate the massing of the addition. The city contracted Seth Bernstein of Past Consultants to review the proposed modifications and addition for compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards. Mr. Bernstein had reviewed 3 evolutions of the plans. In his latest review, there were 2 outstanding items. The first item was the relocation of the original front door, which is not recommended. There's a window there currently, and they're proposing the front door. The second is the massing of the 2-story addition, specifically the dormers that were introduced during the revision of the plans. The plan at the top of the slide labeled 1, it was from the original submittal. So originally the main home was connected to the garage. In response to Mr. Bernstein's initial review of the application, the applicant modified the plans to remove the connection between the home and the garage, and a dormer was added on the south elevation. The plans were then further modified to comply with setbacks on the north side, adding another dormer to the 2nd-story addition. The evolution in the design created increased massing and scale relative to the historic home. The next series of slides will show the existing versus proposed elevations. The existing conditions are on the left and the proposed design is on the right. This is the front elevation as seen from the street. This is a close-up of the proposed. Here you can see the new location of the front door and the massing of the addition. This slide shows the existing and proposed conditions for the south elevation as viewed from the driveway. Let's take a closer look. On the new addition, the applicant is proposing similar windows to complement the existing and a mix of woodlap siding on the first story and wood shingles on the second story. The dormer that the architectural historian has concerns regarding the massing is located towards the back of the addition. This is the existing and proposed conditions for the north elevation. Here you can see how the addition is tied into the roof of the existing Craftsman cottage. Although the addition does not preserve the entire roof structure, the character-defining eave on the north side will be preserved in its entirety. This is a rear elevation. The existing conditions show the two-story garage and a two-story existing addition on the rear of the original cottage. A closer look at the proposed rear elevation shows the access to the second unit above the garage through an external staircase. The back of the new addition shows the design elements of the Craftsman continued around the home with the wood corbels, barge rafters, shingles, and lap siding. The historic Craftsman is a non-conforming structure because it does not comply with the front and rear inside yard setbacks. The code requires existing non-complying structures that will be improved beyond 80% of the present fair value market of the structure may only be modified if the structure is brought into compliance with the current zoning regulations. The model and addition to the primary historic structure are valued at 107%. To bring the historic home into compliance with setbacks would require relocating the home on the site. This is contrary to the Secretary of Interior standards. Staff is requesting that the Planning Commission provide the applicant with direction to either apply for a variance to allow for the historic structure to encroach into the required setbacks or to modify plans to come into compliance with the 80% regulation. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission provide the applicant direction regarding massing, location of the front door and window, the non-conforming valuation, and continue the project application. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Questions for staff?
No, thanks.
Okay. All right. This is a public hearing. Would the applicant or their representative like to make a presentation?
Good evening. My name is Derek Van Alstyne. I am the representative and the designer for this project for Douglas and Kristen Edwards. And I have with me Michael Tinsley from my office, who is an architect and who will go through the modeling sequence for you. Prior to that, I'd like to say, thanks staff for the work on this project. There has been considerable back and forth trying to get all the pieces of this puzzle worked out. This property, as you probably all know, is right on the edge of failing altogether. The original cottage in the back and the second construct, there are actually two constructs behind the Craftsman, are in severe disrepair. This property was let go for years and years and years, and the rear of the garage is also in severe disrepair. If the termites let go holding hands, we're in big trouble. That being said, our intent from the very beginning and the intent of the owners was to preserve this house as best we possibly could. It's turned out to be a considerable chore. It's taken long hours and a long period of time. This is 8.5 months we're into it at this juncture, and we used every bit of that time trying to figure out how to best go about this. What we're left with after we remove the first two constructs behind the Craftsman is a building that has 3 walls, no rear wall, a floor, no foundation, and a very scantily built roof that has to be rebuilt from the inside out. We can do that and we can preserve it. And we can do so in a manner that's absolutely consistent with its original construction. We're planning on using full dimensional lumber on the Craftsman portion, meaning that it's an inch thick for the siding, a full inch thick. That siding will be rotary cut with a rotary saw so that it matches the existing siding. It'll all be redwood. All of the pieces that you see that are on that Craftsman portion will be replaced exactly as they were, as much as it is feasible. We've designed the second, the addition to support that rear wall of the cottage that doesn't exist. And I have to say, to do another piece there to join the two would be to essentially construct a structure so that we could add a hyphen, if you will, which seems like it doesn't work at all. We'd have to actually do something new to attach the old to the new, because there is no back wall to the house as it is. So we chose to, using the Secretary of Interior standards, allowing a second-story construct to the rear of the property, chose to abut that directly. We pushed it back a couple of feet to give the roof breathing room, and I think that we've done as good a job as can be done in keeping it in its original shape. So I think what you end up with is a project that maintains the existing character, maintains it over the long haul, and hopefully we can get to a point where we can satisfy the Secretary of Interior standards. And I think when we look at the model from the street, and we set up station points down the center of the street with a viewpoint of 5 feet above the ground in the center of the street, and you'll see by those station points exactly what this property will look like, including the massing of the properties next door. So in part of the massing model, we have all of the foliage, trees, everything that exists there now, plus the landscaping that's proposed. In the second series of massing model, we denuded all that. We took away the foliage, we took away everything except the massing, so that you could see just how the streetscape is put together and understand how it works. So I think that there are two issues here. One is, can we satisfy the Secretary of Interior standards? And I understand what the long-term goal is. I agree with it. I've done a number of historic projects in Capitola, probably some that you may not even recognize as having been redone. This goes back 5 different generations of planning directors. We tried to assemble a team that would give you the very best product that you could possibly get with this project. John Draga, who was the contractor who did St. Joseph's, pays incredible attention to detail. That's exactly what we wanted for this. And
You mean St. John's?
I'm sorry, I said St. Joseph, St. John's. From the beginning, we tried to put together a team that would give you the absolute best. It is also we have a fiduciary responsibility to the owner to get him the best that he can get. His wife is an historian. She teaches history. They are avid lovers of Depot Hill, as am I. So with that, I'll leave it at that, and maybe Mike can run through the massing model for you.
Thank you.
So, like Derek said, we set up the cameras. Go straight down the middle of the street, starting at the neighboring property. And so, as we go through the slides here, it's going right down the middle of the street and looking at the streetscape. So this is the first view. And then as we start to progress down the street,
Part of what you're seeing here is the second floor is set back 33 feet from the street, quite a distance. And I think what this shows is that the primary view is of the cottage as it exists today, only in a rehabilitated state.
so those are the color slides showing the colors of the proposed project as well as the existing and proposed landscape from one end of the street to the other. Do you want to go through the massing?
Sure.
So these remaining slides take everything away except for the massing. It takes away the colors, landscape, and it's just purely the existing houses on either side in the proposed project. And they're the same views that we just saw.
Is the camera elevation at the street level?
It is at the
accurate
street level.
In regards to what currently exists out there? Because it appears to me when you drive down the street, look at this home, it's actually higher above the street elevation than it appears to be here.
It is. So we show the street being 18 inches below basically what's the front yard of our project. So this camera is set 66 inches above the street level, which is lower than the grade.
So what you're seeing is that both the house and the garage present themselves essentially as they do today. Some of the view that you see here now is obscured by, there's a great deal of foliage. There are the birch trees in the front, and we think that's a ginkgo that's actually back towards the garage. The amount of foliage on those trees is substantial. One of the things I was going to mention is regarding the front door. In Seth's comments, he said that it's not recommended, but that doesn't mean that it's precluded from being moved. It doesn't mean that if it were moved, it would violate the Secretary of Interior standards. That's not what he says. What he says is that it's not recommended. If you go through the plans of we went through a number of Stickley's plans. Stickley, when he was producing his magazine, was selling kit houses through the magazine, as were a number of periodicals in that era. In almost every single one of those sets of plans for craftsman houses during that era, almost all of them had the door facing the street. Very, very few had the door entering from the side. So it's not atypical at all to have the door facing the street. The reason that we asked to change it is it makes a huge difference to the floor plan. If the door is left where it is, it provides a very awkward circulation pattern through the living room. With the door moved around the corner, we take the original door and place it, and there's just enough room for it, place it facing the street, and take the window that was there and place it next to the adjacent to the entry deck porch. all of a sudden you have a circulation within the house that works far better. So the Secretary of Interior Standards allows for that. What the Secretary of Interior Standards says specifically is that the contemporary reuse of the space is allowed such that it doesn't ruin the fabric of what's there, essentially. So we feel both the issue of the front door and of the massing are mitigated. One, by the fact that the way that you view the primary elevation of this house, and because of what you can see from all the different angles on the street, the Craftsman is, as it exists, what your primary impression of the house is. The massing is receding to the back, and that's what the Secretary of Interior Standards calls for. So those are the two issues that I think we're asking for direction on, and I think we've mitigated both of those.
Can I make a point?
Yep.
In his first report, actually, he's saying that it removes, it also, by moving the door to a new location, it also removes a period window.
Yes, so what we're talking about is trading. There's a window that is where the door is shown in this rendition. What we're talking about is trading the two.
So you're not removing it.
Right.
Is the design of the door the same as existing?
The same door.
Okay.
Yeah, as much as possible, every stick that we can maintain, and there are a lot that cannot be maintained, but every stick that we can maintain, every piece of the exterior that we can maintain of this structure, we're going to try and do so to the best of our ability. Sure.
Right. I'm Doug Edwards. I'm the co-owner of the house. My wife is unfortunately not able to be here tonight. I just wanted to kind of back up a step and say a few things. First, I want to thank the Commission for a number of things. I want to thank you because when we moved to the Bay Area 35 years ago, we started coming to Capitola probably the first year we moved here. And this has been the community we come to every summer, and we've had 3 kids along the way. They all come here. We all come here. And a couple of years ago, we started thinking about it would be wonderful to have a home in Capitola. And the way we envisioned this home is a place that we could bring our entire family, our 3 kids. My oldest son is engaged, my in-laws, my brother-in-law and his family. We wanted to have a place we could come where we were not interested in flipping a house. We're not interested in renting an apartment. We're not interested in anything other than being part of this community. And when we looked for a couple of years, we knew we wanted to be on Depot Hill. And the reason we wanted to be on Depot Hill because it is such a charming, historic community. And that is one of the things that I thank the Commission for. And as Derek mentioned, my wife is a historian. She is a professor of history. Not exactly this period. She did Russian and Soviet history, but she's a historian. To the point that I wrote a book, and she made me put all these footnotes and references in because she's a stickler for that kind of historical detail. But when we looked at this property, it was in a real state of disrepair. I mean, it was filled with all kinds of miscellanea, and it was a property that was really on its last legs. And yet, I walked in and I knew that this was the home I wanted. And there was the charm of this period, the craftsman style, all of that appealed to me so much. I just fell in love with it. My wife thought I was a little crazy because she just saw the clutter, but I was looking at this house and thinking this could be a wonderful, wonderful home for us and for our family. And so even though I understand there's been some back and forth with the city historian on some of the niceties of the details of the history of the house, I'm grateful for the fact that so much attention is being paid, because once we get this process completed and we're able to move into the house, it reassures me to know that the neighborhood, the character of the neighborhood is not going to change. So I applaud you for upholding standards. It is why I'm drawn to this neighborhood, why my wife and I both feel this would be a wonderful place to live. As to the door, this is an amazing door. I love this door. It is a big, solid piece of wood. It's very wide. It should be a feature of the architecture. I can't understand why it was on the side of that, where you can't see it. I mean, it is the most interesting part, of the facade of the house. And, I mean, when you open that door, you look into the dining room area, which my hope is to restore completely to a craftsman-style dining home, something that, dining room, that would be immediately recognizable to somebody walking in from that period. And I want that door to open into that vista. Right now it opens into the living room. It actually opens into kind of an awkward corner that is not an architectural feature. So I'll just, summarize by saying it is our goal to make this house as historically accurate as possible. We bought it because it's a craftsman home. We never had any intention of doing anything else with it other than to restoring it to that period in the most true possible way. And I mean, there are some accommodations that we have to make because we have to live in the house, and we need a back wall. We need the ceilings to be high enough that we can walk without bumping our heads. But we've gone through many iterations of this, and each time we've tried to accommodate the requirements from Capitola, and haven't felt that they were unreasonable. But we want to work with the city, and we want to make it a home that people will recognize as historic and will feel fits in the character of the neighborhood. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Are you finished with your presentation?
Just to say a couple things. One is that we'll continue to work with staff as much as we need to, and with whatever direction you care to give. It's actually my pleasure to do so. It's been an interesting ride, and it'll be interesting until it's done, I think. One of the things that, well, I think I'll just leave it at that. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you. Questions for the applicant's representative right now?
I have a couple questions. The ceiling height of the second floor?
Is set at, the plate is at 7.6. So we dropped, one of the accommodations we made was that although we wanted to have higher ceilings, the ceilings in the lower floor are already high. So we're trying to keep the mass as low as possible. We dropped the plate down to 7.6 to accommodate that.
What's the height of the ceilings in the addition on the first floor?
Addition on the first floor? 811. 811 allows us to have traditional trim work inside and to have some additional coffers if we want them in the ceiling and moldings, and still have a little tiny piece of wall left. So the idea was to keep the floor level the same in the addition as it is in the front of the house, so that it's all contiguous and that the ceiling heights don't change. And that is so that we can do as an accurate and authentic trim work inside as possible.
There's a second floor on the back end now. How do the ceiling heights of that section compare to what you're proposing to put there?
They're very similar. The rear section of the house, I don't know if you could bring that back up, but it's a real conglomeration. It was tacked on, added on. It was very poorly constructed. The ceiling actually drops down in the rear section of the house slightly. And then as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there, on the main portion of the house, just above the rear door, the roof line was, I don't even know how they arrived at the roof line in the back. There was a construct to get the stairs up, and that's that second little piece of roof you see to the right of that structure. The ceiling in there is about 8 feet, but the floor is dropped slightly. And the other thing that happens that's a difference between the old structure and the new structure is that the way we build this day and age, the depth of the joist necessary to do the spans in this house require that we have a little bit more room. So we're actually taking everything and it's compact, trying to get it all to work. That's the other reason we dropped the plate line upstairs, is to accommodate a taller joist.
Great. Other questions? Thank you. We'll reserve
Mm-hmm.
questions. Anybody here tonight to talk about this issue, this application? No?
I'm Rex Walker. I was hoping somebody from the museum would speak for this house. Very historic, important person. Frank Rainier, Superintendent Capitola. He was the man. He did everything, from the roads to the water to sanitation. He was the person. A few observations. You know, it's a very similar project that you just approved, and I just hope you can be consistent in what you've already allowed. I'm concerned the way the house is sitting right now. If you don't do anything, I think it's going to be a problem. I think it's going to be more like a tear down than a restoration. The skirting's been pulled off. There's missing glass in the windows. It doesn't look very good, and it's not going to hold up, too much longer in this state. The DPR report is kind of lacking in some of the historical aspects of it. According to my father's research in the 1970s, which were, composed of photos, interviews with the relatives, I grew up there. I have met Ida Rainier. I have met Francis Rainier. So I have a kind of a feeling for the family. The original house was built in April of 1904 for Frank's mother, Marie Louise. When she died in 1912, the original cottage was moved back, and construction started on the craftsman-style house in 1914. I have a copy of the ledger, the construction ledger. The barn was not really a barn. It was, I don't know exactly what you call it, but my photo showed that there was no doors on the front. The barge rafter is an original. I don't know how you're going to proceed on this important historical house.
Just so you know, Carolyn Swift has weighed in 3 times on this, twice on the record. I'm fairly sure it's in the records that you've seen, and once was late this afternoon, and it was a communication to the Planning Commission about omissions and errors in the DPR report. So we will be addressing that.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, there are, and she's enumerated many. So
That is available as additional materials in the back.
okay, so you can take a look at what she's written.
Today?
An
That she
email we
wrote
got
today.
today. Yes. Yeah. So go ahead and take a look at that too. That will definitely be taken into consideration.
There's a lot of information that hasn't been dug up yet. There's a huge amount of information.
Well, if you have it, we would appreciate you bringing it forward. I want to kind of, okay, as long as you're not getting up to talk, I want to go back and forth here. Anybody else tonight who wants to speak about this application that's here? Okay, I'll close the public hearing and ask for commissioners' comments.
Come on, somebody else jump in this time.
Well, I was hoping to wait till later, obviously, but these are obviously projects that take a lot of consideration, and I know more about historical buildings in Capitola than I thought I would ever know. I have an appreciation for what Carolyn has put forward. Yeah, I recognize there are some mistakes maybe in the DPR, but having said that, I think from my perspective, the conclusion is basically the same. It's a historical house, and it has some relevance in Capitola, and I'm glad to see that the owner is willing to recognize that and want to make sure that he meets the intent of keeping that historical perspective there. When you get into the standards and stuff, you know, as far as I can tell, and correct me if I'm wrong, really, I guess because we are lacking our own historical review board, we have to go to the Interior, Secretary of Interior's guidelines. But since this does not have any tax exemptions to it or federal aid to it, that really is truly just a guideline. It's not in fact as like an ordinance. Is that true?
So the Secretary of Interior standards are to maintain the historic integrity of properties, and the applicant, if they do not choose to list it on the federal, in which this report says it wouldn't qualify unless within a district, they could move forward if it were to qualify for tax purposes. But when it comes to historic, we utilize the Secretary of Interior standards for the CEQA exemption to know that we're not losing a historic resource, which is an environmental resource under the review of CEQA. And it does not matter if it's historic on the local level, the state level, or the federal level. They're all treated the same. If we did have local standards for historic review, then our local guidelines could be reviewed when these properties are just local, only significant at the local level. So.
Thanks, Katie. So what I'm hearing from the owner is that, and from Derek and the builder, is that they want to make sure we meet those guidelines. They're looking at the rehabilitation guidelines in the project. I'm familiar with Mr. Draga because he built the church, rehabilitated the church across from me where I live, and I guess Bonnie was the historian for that place as well, and I know they did a heck of a job. And if that's what we can expect from this house on Central, then I think as a city we're off to a good start of having a good representation of what Mr. Remnier had owned back in the earlier part of the century. So for me, I'm encouraged by what I see and what's being recommended. I know we have some probably compromising to do to get through the process, but at this point, I feel encouraged that we have the right people doing the build. We have an owner who's willing to that recognizes the significance to the city, and I hope that we don't get too tied into this historian, that historian, and what they said, because I think at the end of the day, they all want the same thing. And I think we recognize that it's a historical value locally, and I think if we move forward with intent of meeting the Secretary of Interior standards, then we're off to a good foot.
Thank you.
I have a question for staff, and it's regarding this copy of the email we have from a lady named Catherine. I'm not sure who Catherine is.
That's Catherine Galtieri.
Catherine Galtieri, that's who I assumed it was. But in her last paragraph, she states that Carolyn has made a strong case for this property to qualify for the California Register. She also states that the other consultant disagrees and believes that a focused EIR be done as a requirement because of that disagreement. Could you comment on that?
Commissioner Ruth, you know, the way that I understand it, there's really no disagreement on the conclusion. They both agree that the resource is significant. They also agree that the alterations could meet the Secretary of Interior standards. What I'm hearing is the disagreement is whether or not it would qualify for registration at the state level, which in the planning context before us tonight really doesn't have a bearing on the application. If the project were to move forward, it would still be eligible to be listed at the state level should the state determine that, but the city doesn't make those determinations. So I think really what we're looking at is a significance determination of whether or not the alterations would be consistent, and if that's the case, then there's not a CEQA problem.
Okay. You've also recommended tonight that it be continued, and I'm just curious what else needs to be ironed out that would support a continuance.
There were the issues that Katie presented in her staff report, the massing of the structure, whether or not the Planning Commission thought it was an acceptable design, the location of the front door, and then the non-conforming valuation. Because of the extent of the construction that's necessary, it would exceed the city standards for non-conforming structures, which triggers a requirement to bring up everything into current standards. So we'd either need to direct the applicant to peel back their design to meet those non-conforming standards, or should the commission choose, you could direct them to submit an application for a variance.
Oh, so they haven't submitted that application
They have
yet?
not.
Okay.
We would need to renotice with the inclusion of a variance.
Well, in that regard, I think it's very tastefully done, and I think they've really made some great forward-thinking efforts here to preserve and protect what's historical about this building. So I think I could support what they've submitted.
Ron, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. I'm happy that they got parking on the site. Yes, my comment. My difficulty is with staff keeps using non-conforming this, non-conforming that. And, you know, I can remember the issue of non-conforming came up with the Depot Hill area with regards to Shangri-La Apartments on Oakland Street, and they're still there, and they've been remodeled several times, which was not to be done under the non-conforming section of our ordinances. It was to the non-conforming section of our ordinances to give an economic life to those at the time we enacted that ordinance, and that was a certain number of years, and we've exceeded that years, I can tell you, and now they use it when they talk about everything. But I'm having a problem with this 80% versus what this is, which they quote in here. What was it?
107.
107. Yeah. Okay. I kind of like the design and everything else. I think the only thing I had trouble with is I would call it, it's not really a breezeway, but the door between the barn garage and the house addition, the new addition. It's at the back of the property, at the end of the driveway, to the left of the barn, the right of the house. In all the models, there's one that's real good, but we haven't found it yet. Well, there it is on the wrong side. It just doesn't. It kind of leaves me cold. I don't know what it is. Is I guess what.
Stairwell?
Is that what it is? I'm talking about.
A gate in between.
It's a gate or something going to the back.
That's
right in there. Yes. And there was a better one than that, and other than that, this is, normally people would talk about a typical overbuild and stuff like that, but this property can accommodate this. I found it interesting the first time it went to Arkansas that there was a big to-do about the doors that existed on the garage or the barn or whatever you want to call it. And they certainly didn't look period to me, and still don't. And I'm glad to see that what they're proposing more nearly matches what would have been. I could support this by passing it on. I think it does have, the staff's recommending to go back to them with some recommendations. I don't know what recommendations I would make, but I don't think that the historical thing is, for me is, I'm sorry, I like historical buildings and like it, but it's like we're trying to play one-upmanship between a bunch of historians and they all have a different take on it. And I'm sorry, that's my comments. I could support it the way it is.
Thank you.
So I'm going to make a bunch of comments here. Frank Rainier is an extremely important character in Capitola's early development. And I think this structure is a real example of a structure that is not only an important structure to Capitola, but it's in an area that's really important to Capitola. And I'm just going to make some comments about the DPR because I don't think I would be true to myself if I didn't. The DPR it's poorly written. It's got historical inaccuracies. It's got typos all the way through it. So when you start reading it, it immediately, if you know Capitola's history, it immediately falls down in its credibility. It goes through a lot of details. It says he had a scar on his nose, but it can't spell Capitola or Rispin correctly throughout the document. It's confusing because it contradicts itself. It says on one page that he was likely living in the house at the time of his death, but then it says that he lived next door from 1919 until he died. Which one is true? It states that there's only an indirect association between Frank and this structure because he owned multiple properties. Paraphrased, but that's what it says, which doesn't make any sense to me at all. And the dates of service on his service to the County Board of Supervisors, I did not have time to research it myself, but those dates are challenged, and whether or not it could be eligible for listing on the national, at the federal level, hinges on that. So the DPR is really, really not well done. And we rely on the DPR a lot in making our assessments of how significant the historic resource is. The bottom line, though, in its second or third revision is that the DPR does say that it meets the Capitola Historic Features Ordinance, which means that we treat it as a local resource and we move forward from there, which means to us that we need to preserve its potential as a contributing factor, and we need to look at it from those duties that I spoke about earlier in preserving history for the city of Capitola. So meeting the Secretary standards, to me, becomes then sort of a line in the sand. And staff had somebody else review it and come back and say that the movement of the door, there were like 3 different things that they're in the documents. But those things need to be adhered to for me to really be able to go forward with the project. So when I look at all that and summarize it down, I'd love to have a DPR that was written, updated to be accurate, but at least have the peer review and the attached documents that we've had attached to that in our historical files and in the files that the museum has, so that when someone uses it as a reference, they're looking at accurate data and not what we have in that report. And I'd like to see design changes to meet the Secretary of Interior standards. When I look at the design, I understand what you're saying about the door and the window, but if that makes it a contributory or not, I couldn't see where it makes that much difference on the inside. And it's my understanding that it makes that much difference if we move it or we don't move it. So I'd like to see it stay where it is. And the second-story addition, the house across the street that we just approved has a second-story addition that does not appear to me to be as massive. This mass seems to me to just overwhelm that little cottage. And even though from the street you're not going to see it as much, it's a lot more than what we just approved. So in being consistent, I don't think that it's apples and apples between what we approved across the street and looking at this one. I'd really like to see that second-story mass come down, whether it's removing the dormers, dropping the floor, dropping the ceiling height on the first floor. I'm not sure what the creative way to do, or moving it back some. I'm not sure what the right thing to do is, but I think the massing is still overwhelming. And I went to look today when I found out that the gates were unlocked to walk around it, and it hadn't really realized that there is a second story already there, and you can't see it at all. So granted, you're going to see this one more, but it seems to me that there should be a design that's not that much more. Just, those would be my comments.
I think this is going to be a really beautiful project. I think whatever we end up with, this is going to be a lovely, lovely home, and I really appreciate the care and the thought that you have for Capitola. I'm going to talk about the DPR and the massing. I never knew that this. I learned something today from Linda, and that is that all DPRs are stored not only here at City Hall, but they're also stored at the museum. And when somebody goes to research the history of Capitola or research a particular building, or for whatever reason they're going to do it, whether it's for their own purposes or whatever, an article, they're going to rely on the accuracy of the DPRs. And I've never seen Carolyn Swift, in all the years that she's worked in the city of Capitola and all that she knows about the city of Capitola's history, I have never seen her go to bat so vociferously as this particular instance. She is really, really upset with this DPR, and I believe we need a redo of the DPR with good information in it. And I agree with you guys. I do separate that from considering massing and considering the construction of the house. But the DPR is so important to the ongoing garnering of information for future generations, that I really believe we need an accurate DPR, not just a patched together, read Bonnie Bamberg's DPR and then read all the real stuff. I don't think we're doing the history of this house any justice by patching a DPR. And it sounds to me as though Mr. Walker has even more information if he's willing to impart that could add to this. This is one of the 5 most important places that we have in Capitola. So that brings me to wondering why we've got commissioners who are willing to follow the Secretary of Interior standards in the previous application for a much smaller, less important house, and disallow that roof and say that it's this kind of massing, even though we've got an architectural historian too who say this massing is too much, say that, oh well, that's okay. This house is more important. I really believe that we need to pare down the massing here. And I agree about the front door. I think it even looks better with the front door facing. It just looks right. I would really like to go back to Seth and ask him what he means by the word recommendation. Because if he's just saying, you know, I recommend it, but if it was just a bad choice of wording, I would like to know that. I was talking to Katie today. She mentioned something about the dormers being sort of the deal breaker for her, and I agree. I think that's what actually threw this over the edge for me. It makes it boxy, and it just bulks it out in a not very attractive way, I think. I think either reducing those dormers or getting rid of them entirely is the answer for me. So I would really rather see this commission follow what they did with the last application, a less important home, a way less important home, and follow the Secretary of Interior standards and the recommendations we've gotten from 2 architectural historians that we've worked with before that we like, and ask them to reduce the massing and keep the front door where it is.
Madam Chair, if I could, I wasn't recommending that we don't follow Department of Interior standards, or Secretary of Interior standards. I'm saying it's vague, and you have different historians saying different things. And when you read Seth's, what Seth is saying is it's a recommendation. And at the end of the day, I don't know that anybody, what I read out of it, there's not a direct code or ordinance inside there that says the door has to remain in order to meet that standard. It's really comes down to perception and who knows. And even if we get into who was Frank Rainier, which you know, obviously he was, you know, I accept Carolyn at her word that what he did in the city of Capitola as a supervisor, but it really doesn't change at the end of the day. The bottom line is, are we going to follow the Secretary of Interior standards or not? And I think we have an agreement to want to do that. The question comes to, is it a recommendation, or is that the gospel that it has to be, the door has to remain in place, or even the massing? So I think
the massing, though, was not a recommendation. He came out clearly about massing. That was at the door.
But I think that's a perception of an individual that they hired. So,
you know, it's kind of interesting. This particular design of the old house, there's two that are almost alike this, and don't quote me, but I believe they're on California Street in Santa Cruz, and one having the door the way they're proposing it, and the other one having the door the other way. And I'll be honest with you, the door doesn't bother me in the proposal at all. Can I agree with you on the massing? Yes, but I somehow don't want to tie them up from going ahead with the project, because I think it's going to be a good project, to get the historical facts right, you know. And that's kind of what I heard from Linda, you know, and I understand the reasoning as with your involvement with the museum and the archives and the rest of it. I just finished a book on the justice system in Santa Cruz County, going way back to the original judges and stuff. And in my lifetime, there's some inaccuracies in it. And yet it's supposed to be a historical novel, you know, type of thing.
If I could just clarify, what I was saying was that at a minimum that all of those documents need to be attached together so that there is accuracy in the record and flagged somehow.
Oh, I took it to mean that somebody had to get it right.
No, I don't think we can demand that they give us, at least staff advised me earlier that we can't really make them redo the DPR, and I don't think it's going to change anything in the DPR. I don't think she's going to go change her conclusions, which, as TJ said earlier and staff has confirmed, it all comes down to we agree on the answer, on the final answer. It's a local resource. We need to treat it the way that we treat local resources, which means the Secretary's standards need to be met. That's how I get it. And if we can do that with what we have now, I'm okay with that. I wouldn't hold this project up just to get it rewritten. But I would like to see changes to the design which would hold this project up until we see a design that we can live with. And having the answers to whether moving the door meets the standards or doesn't meet the standards. I would need that answer, because if it doesn't, I would beg them to leave it where it is.
I have to apologize to all you. It wasn't California Street. It's the street in Santa Cruz where Ruth's dance studio was for years, and I don't remember what the name of it is right now, but it definitely wasn't California. But the houses are still there.
So I just want to go back and remind everybody that we just voted to follow the Secretary of Interior standards on a smaller, less important house. And there's a chance that we might not do that on a larger, way more important house. And I just beseech you to consider, you know, some historic district in the future and leaving that door open for future generations to do that if it's possible. I would hate to be the commission that they look back on and point the finger that says that was the commission that shut the door.
Let me just, I'm totally on board with that. Just so don't get me wrong, I'm on board with that. What I think we're down to is trying to compromise between historians on what, whether it's massing or whether it's the door, it's a perspective. And I'm not an expert in that area, and I don't pretend to be. And I know you have recommendations, but you have other historians. And I watched what the historian who wrote this DPR, and I agree it was poorly written, and I don't know if we could ask him to rewrite it or not, but that same historian did the house across the street from my place, and it came out beautiful. I mean, the contractor did a great job, the historian did a great job, the city did, you as planning commissioners did a great job of getting a project that still protected the integrity of a very historic and monumental building in Capitola lawn from a person who lived in there. The church was a historical place. You have a dilapidated house, and you have an owner who's willing now to move forward and make an intent to meet those standards. I'm for that. I don't want to hold them up. I want to keep this project moving forward and let them, get on with that. For me personally, I don't know how you afford to have a place sitting there vacant for 8 months. I'm not in that boat. But anything that we can do to get this project forward, and I'm totally on board to meet the Secretary of Interior standards. That's not what I'm trying to get. I think we're debating what would meet and what may not meet, something that may not be applicable at all. I mean, the interior standards are different than what may be part of this the state standards as far as the district, from what I understand, as far as making a district. And I would like to leave that to the experts and let them figure that out. But at the same time, how do we move this project along?
Well, I would like to remind the commission that the church project took several iterations. We needed to go back at it because it was an important structure. Right. And I think we absolutely want to go forward as fast as we can for an applicant. And we also want to take the time that it takes to do it right. So let's try to find some common ground. Let's move forward and say, can we get Franklin Maggi to corroborate Seth? I forgot his last name. Final recommendations. I think we can all safely say that we can put Bonnie Bamberg's recommendations aside for the time being, since we're not holding this particular DPR in high esteem. Let's take the two that we got after that, Franklin Maggi and Seth, and maybe we can go back to either Leslie Dill or Franklin Maggi and have them do a peer review on Seth. I mean, let's just make sure we do this right. We've gone this far. I'm willing to do it another way. If these guys are willing to bring the massing down and they have suggestions on how to do that, maybe we don't even have to do that. But I'd really like to see us. Has the applicant thought about that? You knew what Seth said. Have you thought about what you would do to
see what it would look like without the evil dormers?
The evil dormers? Yes. Are you willing to nix the evil dormers?
I'm not, and I'll show you why not.
Okay.
I think the building is ugly without the gable dormer. I think it provides a place for your eye to stop.
Oh, I'm sorry. You have to come up to this. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the building is ugly without the gable dormer. I think the gable dormer provides a backdrop for what's happening with the rest of the architecture. It gives a place for the eye to stop. If you don't have that, what happens to the side of that building is it looks like a Kleenex box with a hat on it. It has no visual interest and completely dies. If you like, can you hold on a second? Let me find it.
Okay.
Katie, while he's doing that, can you show this is the evolution?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep. I think another important slide is the side elevation from the driveway to see how far back that dormer is. It is substantially, it's really towards the back of the building.
Right.
And also it has an interesting, it replicates that roof overhang, which is an interesting element that when viewed from the front, you'll see that interesting Craftsman style roof overhang. So, but this right here, when Seth, in looking at the evolution, at first he was not concerned with the massing, as he was asking for more separation between the old and the new, in which that's when you saw the eaves come back on either side. But then in this last reiteration, when there were two dormers, that is when he became more concerned with, in his review, with the massing and how it relates to the.
So there was one dormer and he wasn't concerned, but with two dormers he was concerned.
Yeah, with the two.
Got it.
So sorry.
So the sheets that I'm passing around now show the house without the gable dormer on it. After doing that, wasn't satisfied at all that that was the right solution.
Yeah.
I think both Katie and TJ have it right. I think one, it's a personal perception. It's not a science as to what is good and what's not good. Everybody has an opinion, and everybody's going to have a different opinion. The gable dormer that's facing the garage is where the top arrow is pointing there in number 2, sits way back off of the street. So when you're looking at it in 2D on a sheet of paper, it tends to want to jump forward, which is the reason that we put things that are in the distance in a lighter line weight, because they do recede. And I think that gable dormer recedes tremendously. The other gable on the other side is not visible from anywhere. I mean, you have a hard time, if you wanted to see that gable, you'd have a hard time seeing it because the house next door blocks it and you can't see it from the street. It's just not visible. It is visible in the 2D drawing, and so that's not completely accurate because it's not the way that you see it. Nor is the gable over to the rear facing the garage. It's just not as prominent as it looks like in 2D. That's part of the reason that we did. Can we roll the 3? Maybe it'd be a good time to go back to the 3D so you can see how it looks from the street, because that's this model is pretty darn accurate. So I think the idea of too much mass is sort of overblown. I think what happens really is what you see from the street is the cottage shows through. It's not overwhelmed by the two-story addition.
I like this one with no gate. I couldn't resist.
This one has a glass gate.
Yeah. The interesting in the 1, 2, 3 progression that you had up there before is that I think when you see that, the perception of mass on that dormer facing the barn or the garage or whatever you want to say looks so massive because it's so much higher than the breezeway was in the first illustration. In other words, number 1.
Right.
And I think that's what but you don't get the perspective of how far back on the building it is.
It's quite a ways back.
Yeah.
And I think it resonates with the Craftsman portion on the front of the house. It has an opposing gable, which is one of the hallmarks of Craftsman. So what we're trying to do is to get the upper portion to resonate with the lower section, and I think this does that. When you take away that opposing gable, it loses its resonance. It doesn't feel like it belongs. It feels like it's sort of nowhere without that.
Like the current attachment.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's something I didn't get to explain fully earlier on, but, you know, we were very careful to use materials on the rear that are every single one of them is different from the materials used on the front of the house. We have wood casement windows, we have wood windows that have aluminum exteriors instead of wood. We have shingles that are on a different pattern than on the front of the house. We have wood that's not fully dimensioned wood, and the pattern is different on that wood. The trim work on the new two-story section is all resawn trim rather than circular saw cut. So a lot of attention to detail to make sure that that rear portion is differentiated from the original house.
I will say that I am very reticent about going against staff recommendation and the latest architectural historian's recommendation. I feel like when the state comes around, if they ever do, to take a look at our district, they're going to look at what our staff report was. They're going to look at what this application was. They're going to look at what the staff report was. They're going to look at what the recommendation was, and they're going to wonder why we went against both of those. Why would we go against both of those?
Well, not only that, but when you look at Depot Hill and the places up there that have been deemed, you know, historical, that have been modified, they're small little cottages that have been modified, and the modifications have been significantly less overwhelming than this one. And what I'm kind of hearing is that there's no compromise on that. There's no changes to the design that the applicant is willing to make to change the massing at all in that regard, and that just goes against everything that we've done to date.
You know, Linda, I would respectfully disagree. I could think of two houses on Depot Hill. One is on Grand, was blue, now it's white, that has a little tiny cottage in front and the house in back, which I think...
The duplex in back.
it became, I think, I don't know, to me, it just takes away from whatever that initial historical place was supposed to be. That's one. And the other one is that directly across the street from this, where they built a second story on a little tiny piece, and the second story is larger mass than the first story. And so I would have to disagree that. I think this one, and this is why it really becomes subjective, is it really is, to me, I understand the need to have dormers. It provides functionality inside the building, and they've lowered the height of the ceiling in order to bring the massing down as much as they can. So I think they've made some move to try to meet that recommendation. I think they've done everything they can in the front half of the cottage, which is original, and I think it was even more confusing because I think it's actually the middle part of that building, which was the original building, so you didn't have a front or a rear of the original cottage that was there. So in a subjective way, I kind of think that, you know, I think it meets the intent, and I don't know that it's correct to say that we haven't done that up there already. I think both the one on Central across the street and the one on Grand, you know, are probably, in my estimation, again, it's subjective, to be the massing out of proportion with what was there in the first place.
Well, the one on Grand, we kind of built a house behind the cottage. They're not even attached. They're just like separate. Right. And whatever the logic was behind that, I'm sort of at a loss for. But the other one that's on Central is like the one that we just approved earlier tonight in my mind. It's a tiny little cottage that got a second story that allows it to be used by a full family, but when you walk by it, you still see the little cottage.
Well, maybe we're talking about two separate ones across the street, because the original cottage is there, and then if you're facing the house to the left of it, it sits back a little bit. There's like a single story, but with like this big rectangular box that sits on top of that, which really looks out of place. But yeah, I guess we could go back and forth. My question is, where do we go from here? Can we start could I make a motion and move it forward and see where it stops so we can,
That worked last
Yep.
time.
well, and then at least we'll give the occupant and the owner some direction maybe. And so at least it gets a conversation going down a path. So I would recommend that we accept the applicant's proposal. And I would add that if possible to have the DPR rewritten, because I do agree that it was, unfortunately, it has misspelled words and some conflicting statements, and so I don't know if that can be done, but with that, I would make a motion that we move it forward as presented to us.
If I move it forward, are you saying approve it?
Approve it, yes.
So not continue it, but just approve it as it
I'm
is
talking
with
about
the
approving
plans?
it, yes.
Well, don't we have to get the applications for the variances and things first?
I think you would either need to direct the applicant to submit for a variance, in which case we'd have to renotice the application. I suppose you could give direction that they redesign the house so that it fits within the 80% rule, so that it wouldn't need any
That's
variances.
something totally different than what TJ's
Right.
talking about.
Then I guess I should have got clarification first that
Yeah, it's
that
a little
we
confusing.
move forward to get the variances so that we could approve the project as presented.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Welch?
Yes.
Commissioner Graves?
I'm sorry, there was no, I'm not sure of the motion. So I would like to have the motion restated, and so I understand it, because I was reading what the advertised thing was, and then I was reading the recommendation. And the recommendation basically spells out two things, the massing and the non-conforming evaluation. None of this motion goes to either one of those, but all of a sudden Mr. Ruth brought up the idea that the old structure is non-conforming because of a side yard setback, I believe it is. I don't know if maybe a front yard too, I don't know. Yeah, 3 of them? Yeah, okay. So I want to be clear on what the motion is.
So the motion was to direct them to apply with the variances because of the non-conforming, and it's at the 107% versus the 80%.
We haven't noticed the variances.
That's what we'd have to renotice and bring the application back.
So we can't really...
So basically, it's an approval in concept.
Right.
Yeah.
It's an approval in concept.
It could come back on consent.
Then the applicant would be directed to file all necessary applications and bring it back to the Planning Commission.
Then my vote would be yes, if that's the clarification.
Commissioner Smith?
No.
Commissioner Ruth?
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz?
No.
And I just, Chairman Ortiz, I'd like to just comment. You made mention several times tonight during this application that you viewed this project more historical than the one across the street. I personally view them as both equally important to a historic district. And just because one's small and one's big,
That's not the reason for
I know, but you kept saying that, and I think they're both equally important historically.
Well,
That's
I don't
just
think it makes
difference
any
of
difference
opinion.
what we think. I think it makes a difference what the state thinks, and the state doesn't agree with
Well,
that.
and you understand that I have never agreed with the state standards, so I'm not being inconsistent.
Okay, all right, so we'll expect that back on the consent calendar. And what are your opinions about the changing the DPR?
That's something we can certainly require to be corrected if the commission desires.
I would, do I need to restate my motion to make that?
Now,
I think that-
we may not be able to require that, the preparer to correct it, but we can get a DPR that is to a higher
The
standard to your
applicant
satisfaction.
is nodding yes.
Can I also request if it comes back on consent that we have an answer one way or the other about, thank you.
Thank
So
you.
we know how bad we just hurt ourselves.
Thank you. Welcome to Capitola.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, then, we'll move on to our last item on tonight's agenda. That is the Capitola Municipal Code, Chapter 17, the zoning ordinance update. This is reporting on a public outreach for the new zoning ordinance update.
Excuse me, thank you.
Staff report, please.
Okay. I'm sorry, I've got to reopen. Okay, thank you. Okay, I had to share this when I was looking up the original adoption date for the existing code.
Dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Back on November 24th, 1975 was the original update to the zoning code. And since two of you were there, I thought I'd share this
That was
motion.
a consistent no vote.
Yeah. So since 1975, there's been multiple amendments to the code, but never a full rewrite of the zoning code. Within the current task, the zoning code will be updated in its entirety. The majority of the regulations and requirements will stay the same, but our rewrite will remove inconsistencies, redundancies, and outdated information. It will also be organized in an intuitive format with the end goal of being easy to utilize for the general public, the Planning Commission, and staff. I'll first go over the steps for updating a code. Feel free to ask questions as we go along this. Rich and I just wanted to give you an overview of the next year related to the zoning code and what the steps are and where we are currently. So thank you. The first step to updating a code is the public outreach. Over the past 3 months, we've been working closely. We've engaged key stakeholders and the community within the public participation process, which included public surveys, stakeholder interviews, and one-on-one discussions. From August 1st, 2014 to October 15th, we had a survey that was made available to the public on the city website and also at the library and at City Hall. The survey was completed by 150 people, of which the results were in your packet this week. The findings of the survey are definitely not scientific, but will help to identify those development trends that residents and business owners support or would like to see modified. Also, we hosted 5 stakeholder meetings with focus groups. The focus groups included a local resident group, a recent applicant group, a commercial property owner management group, and a business owner group, and an architect, designer, planner group. As each of you know from your participation, the stakeholder meetings were very informative. There were lively discussions, and there was a wide range of ideas and perspectives. The action minutes were also included in your packets. The next step is to organize all of this input that we've received. We have quite a bit of information, and put this into an organized manner and create a list of issues. There will be non-controversial issues such as formatting and updating definitions. There will also be a list of issues that require Planning Commission and the City Council to contemplate and decide what implementation is best for the City of Capitola. These items would include historic preservation, as exemplified this evening, and also the mixed-use parking standards, as well as others. Those are just a couple examples. We are currently working on putting together these issues and plan to present a list in January or February of 2015. The majority of the update will be the first category of non-controversial issues that are translated from the existing code into the new code. There will be a lot of the standards that will stay the same. The focus of the work will hopefully not be an exhaustive list of issues needing direction, but the list of issues that will need direction will be the focus of future public hearings during the first half of 2015. So the issues and option paper will help guide the discussion for the zoning ordinance update. Staff will present issues with various options during Planning Commission and City Council work sessions. along with public hearing. The draft document will be based on the direction given during these public hearings and public meetings. We are estimating a period of 6 months for this step. So as we work through this in the work sessions and get your perspectives, we'll be working on drafting the zoning ordinance for your review. The issues and option paper will guide the discussion for the zoning ordinance update. Staff will present issues with various options. I'm sorry. Once all the guidance has been received from the options and from the discussions, a draft zoning ordinance will be released and a CEQA document for public review and public input. This is estimated to be a 1-month input period. We hope to iron out all the difficult policy questions during steps 2, 3, and 4. We estimate a 2 months for the adoption and hearing, which would result in the adoption of the code on the 40th anniversary of the existing code in November of 2015. The next step is Coastal Commission review. And a Coastal Commission review can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. So we've reached out to the Coastal Commission and have requested a meeting to help identify issues now rather than at the adoption step. So we plan to be in close contact with the Coastal Commission throughout the process as issues arise and keep them informed so that hopefully we're closer to the 6 months to a year rather than 2 years. So that's the outline of the process that's before us, and we'd love to hear your input, anything that came up when you were looking at the feedback that we received during the surveys and the stakeholder groups, if there's anything that you'd like to highlight to ensure that we address as an issue in the existing code, and any questions you may have. Thank you.
I'm just curious, in your opinion, what kind of trends did you notice from the comments, if any?
Yeah, in the residential, it seemed that community character was one of the top concerns, making sure that community character is preserved. So I think the high level of review that is required during residential should most likely be maintained at that level because of that concern. An interesting trend that came out of asking about commercial redevelopment, 41st Avenue, there was a lot of support for making that more of a pedestrian, giving that more character. It seemed a lot of the answers that were in favor of, better walkability, biking, aesthetics. So really in paying attention to design along 41st in the future. There's also the convenience aspects. If you notice the drive-through response, it was off the charts in support of drive-throughs.
Not in the village.
Not in the village and not in the neighborhood commercial areas, but in 41st it was supported. And then a lot of the, like when we talked about future density, if we need to put affordable housing in certain areas or higher density mixed use, the answer always seemed to be 41st near the mall. So it wasn't, there weren't very many unexpected answers that came out of it, which I think shows the planning that's been done to date in this community, and all the areas are very well defined, and as you move through from residential to neighborhood commercial to community commercial, there's really things have been done in the proper places, it seems. So I think it was really it just showed what's been done to date has been working, and that the trend will be to protect things into the future. So
yeah, good work, staff, so far. And I think it looks to me as though it has a nice flow, and it will you're giving us plenty of time to do it. I have a feeling it's going to go very smoothly with a lot of work. Commissioner Gray.
I have a couple of comments on the both the questionnaire that was online and the stakeholder meetings. First of all, if you look at what you presented to us on page 167, which is a group of the question asks, which of the following describes your association with Capitola? I found it painfully that homeowners were not included. If you live in Capitola, that doesn't necessarily make you a homeowner. You could be very transient, and while this survey went on, in the past, 6 months from now, you may not be here again, and yet we didn't do that. And the same thing happened with stakeholder meetings. When we got to the commercial stakeholder meetings, from everything I've read, we had people even complaining about the garbage rates. I'm being very serious now, and I hope that we give credence to the majority of the population, which is here, 12 months of the year or most of the year, and don't give higher credence to the business community, because it always seems to me in the process that we always grease the squeaky wheel. And so I'm a little concerned. I took the survey online, and I followed your stakeholder meetings and talked to some of the people, and I think we're going in the right direction, don't get me wrong, but how you accumulate the data that you receive and how it goes into your zoning ordinance will determine what the electorate and the residents that live here full-time will feel.
Yeah, the survey, it was unscientific. It's certainly imperfect. It was created by Katie and I. We're not,
I'm not complaining
pollsters, and we didn't spend money to hire a pollster or anything. So we did the best we could, but we do recognize it's not perfect. And through that lens, I think, we'll take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. And, one thing that Commissioner Ruth asked about, if we noticed any trends, the one thing I observed was it echoed a lot of what we heard during the general plan update. We value our neighborhoods. We want to protect the residential areas while balancing the need for economic growth in the proper areas of the city. So I think we're going to continue to, try to have that as a theme as we update the zoning code. We're not going to be looking to intensify various areas at the detriment of the community. So, I think we'll continue to go down that path.
Well, I think why I mention it now early on is one of your first stakeholder groups was a bunch of professionals that we all know, Mr. Phantom, other people, and of course they're concerned with the code and how easy it is for them to deal with their clients. But the community as a whole, even in this last election, said that we liked the character of Capitola. Yeah. But we didn't ask the homeowners, and we didn't have a stakeholder meeting for the homeowners. We had a lot of special stakeholder meetings.
No, we had a resident group.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of them were
renters.
I don't
think there was a reach out enough, because the people that attended that are the ones that I saw at the same general plan meetings and the rest of it. And you almost need to pick somebody from each geographical area. That's all I'm saying.
Gotcha.
Any other comments?
I have one question, because this historical thing, I'm not concerned about it, because I really am. And how do we move this district of Depot Hill to the historical district? How do we move that forward? I mean, we had the study done. I read the study. I have the study here, but then nothing's been done. How do we move that forward if we want to do that?
So I think it kind of comes down to the usual issue of resources and priorities. We have it as an action item in our general plan. It's in our department's work program. But right now we have limited bandwidth to take on new projects with the zoning ordinance, the housing element update, climate action plan, and then our core services of processing permits and providing affordable housing and code enforcement. So
it's a staff issue?
It's a matter of resources and priorities. You can always shift priorities around to move something else to the top of the list, or you can throw more resources at it to get it done.
But I guess my question is it an application process, or is it a lengthy process that requires a lot of staff time?
I think for something like that, we need some expertise from an outside consultant to help us. We're not historians, so we need some help in that regard. The amount of time, I think, with a lot of those projects, what really drives schedule is developing consensus, doing outreach, and getting people to agree, and that's what I think would take most of the time, not the technical development of such a plan and putting a district together.
Yeah, I think we need to find ways to give people perks for being sensitive to historical upgrades. And the more sensitive they are and the better their upgrade in a historical sense, the more perks we give them. Because they've got to feel like they get something in order to give something. Because a lot of people feel like they're giving too much, in the way of square footage or parking or whatever. So we've got to make it so valuable to them in other ways, like reduced fees, all the different perks you can give people, to give them carrots, to make them say, well, you know what, that is worth it to me. Because we get, every time we bring it up, which was the last time was in the 90s or maybe the early 2000s, people come out and just go, not in my neighborhood, because I'm not, it's going to reduce my home's value, and I don't really get anything for it. So we need to, it's all about education and also give and take, I think.
Well, there's restrictions on what they can do with their property also, and the perks they want would be to do away with those restrictions. So, I think you've got a conflict in essence there.
Big conflict, which is the reason why we haven't been able to do it. I mean, it's been brought forward in different areas. However, we were successful in a couple of areas, and we should look at that and find out why we were successful in those areas.
Well, maybe we can encourage City Council to hire at least a subject matter expert to start the process. And we've already done it once. We've got a study. You hate to keep, and it sounds like the individual that did the study was
Franklin Maggi.
Yeah, Franklin Maggi, who's still doing work for us. So maybe we'll give us a discount.
If each one of us talked to the person who appointed us on the council and let them know how difficult this is for the Planning Commission and how difficult it is for the applicants, maybe we can get them to move this forward.
Absolutely. Good.
Being in
Well,
a
thank
historical district would make the whole process easier. You could educate realtors to, this is a historic district, and like we do down in the village, people know when they move in, if they've got a historic resource, that it's going to come under a different level of design scrutiny.
It's not like reinventing the wheel. Lots of communities, I can think of Santa Rosa, back when we were four times ago hiring the city manager, we took a trip up there, and they have a historic district up there. In fact, two
Los
of them.
Gatos, Carmel.
Yeah,
there's a lot
everybody.
of
Yeah.
places that we can-
All right, well, let's all do that then if you feel
and
like
even
doing that.
this evening during the last application, there's a low-hanging fruit there of the non-conforming. When you have a historic property, you really don't want it to be relocated within the site.
Right.
So just that one easy thing would be within the non-conforming section to state if it's a historic
notation.
building, it's it doesn't need to go through this process, and that's
and
an
more
easy one. And we
that
heard
one
that.
and more of those is exactly.
Yeah, and there's in our stakeholder meeting, that was additional feedback that we got, is that it's
He did that.
according to the code, we shouldn't be updating our historic properties because it has this 80% valuation when people really do want to be putting money into their historic homes. So.
Yeah, I would hate to have seen tonight's plan get dumbed down because we couldn't give them a variance. That would be crazy. Thank you. Anybody else want to talk about that? All right, then we'll move on to, I've got a couple comments, and I think others might as well. The director's report.
I have a very long director's report this evening. No, I'm all done.
And Commissioner Communications? Commissioner Communications?
I just have one. I am having a really hard time being paperless, so I want to work with staff and come up with something that doesn't give me the whole packet in print every time, but so I can get a little bit more of...
I do have one. Would you adjourn the meeting, if you could, at my request, adjourn it in the memory of Jim Redding for all his many contributions to the city?
I will do that. I will gladly do that. And mine are that, two things came up for me tonight, and that was I really would like to see us either in the new zoning ordinance or prior to, if you can, get a standardized streetscape, a standard for streetscapes, because every one of them is different. Tonight's, although beautiful, felt like you just kind of wonder about it, whereas you see the first one, and then the second one you see this very professional one, and maybe there could be something where there's just the lowest standard that is not going to cost all the money that the second one costs, but that it's done by a CAD program, or it's done by, something where we feel like we can really trust it and we know that it's right. And then the second thing, I would really like to consider having one architectural historian for the city to run all of the applications by that need to be run by that. Carmel does that, other cities do that. I think one of the problems that we had with the second application compared to the first tonight was in the DPR. And the problem with the first one, and then we go out to a second one, and all of a sudden we've got 3 opinions, and we don't know what ends up, we don't know where we're going with it, and it really dilutes the whole importance of that. And if we have somebody we can really trust and whose opinion we value, then I think we'll get some consistency as well.
Rather than have the application, I think why you get the inconsistency is whoever pays for it gets what they want. So maybe you need the fee at the application time to come to the city, and the city hire the historian
Well, we've got
with
that,
that
right?
money.
We've got that, right? Isn't that what we did with this already?
Not really,
No, only when
because
it
the
became
one,
opposition, then
yeah,
we had
right.
So they hired Bonnie.
They hired Bonnie, and then we had a third-party review.
Okay.
But we did charge the owner for that.
Right,
The
and
city's not
we
paying.
did hire Seth.
Right.
And Frank.
But when you say we hired Seth, we billed the
Correct.
owner.
We
Yeah.
billed the,
And-
yeah,
But in this
sorry.
case, the reviewer reviewed what was done by somebody else. They didn't come in and do
Right.
the review.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
And we always recommend to applicants that we take in the deposit and hire
Yeah.
the person doing the study so that there isn't this conflict of.
Right, but what happened this time then?
Even Seth had 3 different reports. So as he got more information, he changed, his 3 letters,
This was really messy.
it was. I agree.
Really unfortunate on this particular house, too. Sad. Okay, that's all I've got, and I will adjourn this meeting in the memory of dear Jim Redding.
Very good.